And
We're live.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts, but today we are starting a whole new month, whole new theme, and look out for Mad Men, look out for the crazies. We are doing stuff with the films that have something to do with the insane asylum. So, Jake, why don't you tell us what movie you have in store for us today?
All right. So our theme actually is August in the Asylum. And this one is a little film you may have heard of. It's a Milos Forman film from 1975 based on the book by Ken Casey called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Starring, of course, Jack Nicholson with Louise Fletcher and a surprising cast of mostly unknowns that became known partly through this film and definitely later. And it's basically, that's the very short description on IMDb, which is kind of covers it, is a criminal pleads insanity and is admitted to a mental institution where he rebels against the oppressive nurse and rallies up the scared patients. More or less the plot in a nutshell. And we have a fairly large group here tonight, which is probably unsurprising given how well known this film is. I'm going to start I think I'm going to start looking at the screen with the one above me and then go counterclockwise. So, Dustin, is this your first time seeing this film, and what did you make of it?
Well, I've heard of this movie for a really long time, and it's got like a reputation as a great movie. And so this was my first time seeing it, and I was actually kind of let down because I was expecting like a serious drama, and it ended up being more of a slice of life kind of thing, like just watching the inmates hang out for a couple of hours. I mean, of course, more stuff happens than that, but that was pretty much the gist of it. And so I was personally unimpressed by this. I mean, it has a fairly powerful ending. But aside from that, I was underwhelmed. I mean, I recognized Brad Dourif in this, and I thought I recognized Christopher Lloyd, too. Was I correct?
Christopher Lloyd's in here.
Danny DeVito.
Danny DeVito.
Vincent Schiavelli's in here.
I did not notice Danny DeVito. How did I miss his ass?
The voice of Chucky and Wormtail from Lord of the Rings was in here.
Well, I know what Brad Dourif.
Brad Dourif, yeah. The yeah. Really I didn't catch DeVito myself the first time I saw this, and then I was like, "Holy, really?" He's a lot thinner in this film, and he has a lot more hair than we're used to.
Oh yeah.
That was before.
Well, this is from like what, 78? So everybody is
75.
75. So this movie, everybody in this movie that we're familiar with as a character actor is something like what, at least 5 to 10 years younger than we were used to seeing them.
Yeah, this is 10 years before Back to the Future, but Christopher Lloyd's still Christopher Lloyd. But yeah,
Danny DeVito and Christopher Lloyd would later go on to be in Taxi after.
I still need to see that. But,
well, Christopher Lloyd was also in a movie with Jack Nicholson called Going South, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Could be. I haven't seen that one. So we was that your take on it, Dustin? Are you?
That was pretty much my thoughts on it.
All right. Then we'll move on to Mo. Is this your first go with this one?
No, I've seen this movie several times over the years. I don't remember how it came about watching it the first time. I know I watched it at this house where I used to babysit this kid. Either his dad had it or I got it through Netflix in the mail to check it out finally, because you hear about it, and I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I can understand how it could be a bit slow depending on your taste or mood or whatever. Definitely powerful ending, powerful performances by Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher. And I mean, yeah, that's pretty much, until we jump into the gist of what I got. In terms of like just it being shot in Oregon, it's pretty monumental in that sense too. I'd say it's right up there with like The Goonies being one of those movies people talk about as being shot in Oregon. There's still I think like a museum to it at the old mental hospital down there in Salem, and obviously they use locations from the surrounding area, and so as just a regional piece of filmmaking, I've got a soft spot for it where that's concerned as well. And I think because isn't the dude that plays the native guy, he's also Fishhawk, if memory serves.
Outlaw of Josie Wales, or
you talking about the teeth?
The main, yeah, Fishhawk. I always remember him from that movie, and I think the first time that I saw it, that was my main takeaway. Was like, damn, Fishhawk is awesome. Hydrotherapy machines through windows and shit.
Right. Well, this was also his big break too. Yeah, we might get into a little bit more on some of those particular stories as we go, because some of them are pretty interesting. Will Sampson is the actor's name.
There you go. Yeah.
Now, Mo, have you made the pilgrimage yourself to the institution?
No, if you guys remember, we'd talked about it briefly back, like right as pandemic was kicking off, and I think Forrest had went to a couple of places, and I was like, yeah, we got that over here, so it'd be cool to go do it. I think it might have even been around the time we were gearing up to do the Goonies, maybe. But I mean, with the pandemic on, it's kind of hard to get out and do stuff like that here in the States. So it's on the list for sure. I've been like by it, because going to Salem, it's like it's hard to miss. So I've definitely seen like the building and been like, that's the place, But I've never been there and experienced it myself, and I really would like to at some point.
It's the place with the thing.
And incidentally, a well-directed movie, Like,
it's certainly worth noting that the film was filmed at a functional mental institution, and that the hospital director actually plays the hospital director in this film.
Does indeed.
Well, functional at the time, anyway.
Yes, but that was quite interesting little tidbit. So, how about you, Roger? Is this your first time seeing this?
Yeah, this is my first time seeing it. Of course, I've heard of the title, but I've never watched it because they're considered to be an old title. I was I knew that Jack Nicholson was in it. It was like one of his first performances. But being a Star Trek fan, I did had a strange sense of deja vu. Was Louise Fletcher? Fletcher. I kept on looking at her and listening to her voice, and I said, I know this voice. I said, aha, Deep Space Nine, Kai Wen. It's my favorite enemy in the whole thing. So, as for the other actors, I just did not recognize Danny DeVito or Christopher Lloyd. I just didn't recognize anybody except for Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher. But I tell you what, I'm glad I watched it. It's something I would never have watched without pushing. But I did watch it. I liked the parts with the build-up and storyline. It did have a rather strong ending. It's kind of like a neat, kind of like a 180 degrees twist and turn. I thought this was going to be a happy-go-lucky fluck all the way through, and it's going to be a happy wagon away, but not quite the way I was thinking. But I tell you what, I didn't know what to make of it, but I tell you what, I had a lot of fun watching it, and thank you for allowing me to watch it.
All right. How about you, Raymond?
This is not my first watch.
Okay.
My father actually loved this film. Go figure. And of course showed it to me at a very young age. I think I watched it at around 5 years old for the first time. Didn't understand it very well at 5. My father just wanted to make sure that he understood. It's like, look at Jack Nicholson. Look at how awesome he is in this. And he liked to point out the suicide scenes with some measure of joy. And which as a 5-year-old, that's also not something you want to be exposed to.
As much as your late father seems to have exposed you to stuff that was perhaps above your appropriateness level, at the very least you were getting exposed to, high quality films just a little too early.
Yep, too early for me to understand it as well.
Right.
Of course, I watched it again several times throughout the years. I know I watched it probably early on in my collecting. But I'd say this is the first time that I've watched it really with a true, legitimate eye and understanding as to how the system works. I work not only as a therapist, but I work at sending people to said institutions. I've done evaluations like the one for Jack Nicholson was supposed to be sent on, and I have seen the inner workings of multiple mental institutions in the state of Virginia that are functioning today. So it is I watching it this time did me a bigger solid, I think, when it came to exposure and understanding as to how the system used to work, what the perceptions are, and really my perceptions of the characters even has changed a slight bit over the years. So to me, I think it's definitely worthwhile to watch again, and I do think it's a lovely film, lovely cast, excellent character building. When you get to the end scene, without all of that work that they did to build up the characters, I don't think that we would have had that last scene would not have been as impactful at the end.
Right.
That's it for me.
All right. How about you, Dave? Is this your first go around with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
No, it is not. Seeing it this, I would have to say this is at least my second time watching it all the way through, because I watched it in bits and pieces when I was growing up over time, because it would be on like USA Network
I feel like
or
late night on cable and shit.
Yeah, and I'd catch bits and pieces of it, and my dad would be like, "Yeah, this is this person, and this is that person." I'd be like, "Okay, yeah, okay, whatever you say, Dad." But later on, I picked up a copy of the film, and I watched it with Tammy like some years back, and it's been a while. So having to watch it a second time gave me an opportunity to do a double take. Oh, holy fuck! Martini is Danny DeVito. Well, yeah. I mean, neither would I have. I mean, he looks like he looks
normal.
I mean, yeah. I mean, he doesn't look like a chunkster. You know,
he's not an adorable little troll yet at this stage.
Well, there are scenes in the film where you see him next to taller actors, and you're like, "Holy crap, he is short." There are other actors who are short. So it's like
the other thing I didn't realize about this film is I was watching the making of documentary behind this, because I went ahead and watched that afterwards, and I found it fascinating that the Douglases were so deeply involved in the film as far as they were, and the fact that none of the studios wanted to touch this film. But I loved the cast. I loved seeing Christopher for Lloyd, especially when that match just lights up his leg. I mean, that is a fucking awesome. I mean, just the way he acted and whatnot was just off the wall. But yeah, I can see how this can be a slow film. But the subject matter is something. I think this is the first film that actually explored, the workings inside of a mental institute as deeply as it did, especially one from at least the late 50s to 60s or whatnot that this was kind of portraying,
True renaissance of the field.
But I enjoyed it. Seeing it again, this is one of my favorite performances of Jack Nicholson's, and to see that Scatman Crothers is along with him as well in there, that was nice to see. So, especially since they're both in The Shining, which,
Right.
with all my negativity of The Shining, I do think that Jack Nicholson was the shining moment of The Shining. So, in any case,
Oh hell, I am the old Scatman. That guy's.
Well,
He's a great
honestly,
highlight of the film as well.
I think I mentioned this in the discussion. One of the reasons I was so down on The Shining is the character Scatman Crothers plays. I loved him in the book, and then he just gets totally
Killed off.
shifted in the movie.
Hey, I'm lucky. I
But-
never got around to The Shining. It's one of the very small,
Right.
number of classic Stephen King books I've never read.
The Shining is amazing.
First one I read.
But the Cooper film
So,
is with it.
yeah.
That's the
So,
mystery.
Dave,
Boy.
is that, are you wrapped up? Shall I move on to Forrest?
yeah, I'm pretty wrapped up.
All right.
I enjoyed it. So, Forrest, what is your take?
Okay.
Yeah.
This is my second time. This is actually my second time watching it, and second time watching it this year. Second time watching it, and also second time watching it this year. Well, actually not this year. It was last time. No, I saw it. Actually, no, that's not true. I saw it a few months ago for its 45th anniversary. But that was for the first time. Growing up, I knew this movie's existence, and then it was considered one of the greatest movies of all time, as well as one of Jack Nicholson's most notable roles or most notable films. And I remember seeing the clip where he's trying to get all the inmates to watch, trying to rally all the inmates to watch the World Series. I remember seeing clips of that on TV, but I had never seen it in its entirety until last year. And yeah, I think a lot of great, fantastic performances all around. But I had no idea going into this, I had no idea just how stacked this cast was. I mean, besides Nicholson and Fletcher, you got DeVito, which to me it was really weird seeing, much like Jason Alexander in The Burning. It's weird to see him both. It's weird to see him both thinner and with hair on his head. As well as Christopher Lloyd, Sidney Lassick, Brad Dourif, Michael Berryman, Vincent Schiavelli, Scatman Crothers. Even there's even a small role from Louisa Moritz, who was in a lot of B movies throughout the 70s and 80s.
It really is stacked.
Yeah. And then also seeing all these connections, how many of these actors would go on to do other things together, you had DeVito, Nicholson, and Schiavelli all appearing as Batman villain, all playing Batman villains.
Yeah.
And then like Dave was saying, Nicholson and Crothers would go on to do The Shining together.
Well,
Just
Vincent Schiavelli has a bit part in Amadeus, and then Danny DeVito was a major supporting character in Man on the Moon, both of which Milos Forman directed. So it's kind of keeping it in the family a little bit.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think it was it's definitely very much a slice of life movie. I'm fine with. I probably don't watch those movies as much as I don't really watch movies like that as much, but I really enjoy. But I think it was really very well done, acting, the story, actually acting, the script, and as you guys were saying, also how I can't, I'm not really thinking of any classic movies prior to this one that really explored the inner workings of a mental institution.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of plenty afterwards, but not too
Yeah.
many
Well,
before.
Yeah.
we'll be discovering a couple of them this month, but
So yeah, I think it's appropriate that we
the
start
thing,
out this month
so,
with,
yeah.
with the one that kicked that kind
right.
of blew the door open on it.
You definitely had movies where they had scenes, like Psycho had a couple of scenes at the
Yeah.
end, and those kind of
or like Dracula, or even or like Frankenstein and
Mhm.
Dracula.
Right, yeah, Renfield.
One of the
So
greats.
you're not. A lot of times, people really, and you got to keep in mind, especially back in the older days, it's not something that people wanted to see in film very often.
Or
Yeah.
discuss. It was a
It's
taboo
just
subject.
it was hidden a lot of
Oh,
times, and family
Right.
members like to hide. You have that little secret.
I mean, I feel like,
Yeah.
mental health has only become an open discussion within the last decade.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, what makes this? Well, I'll tell you when I tell my.
Yeah, you got Forrest. You got any more you want to throw out?
I think that's all I can. I think that's all I can throw out for now.
Okay. Well then, Dane, what's your thought
Well,
on this one?
I saw this film back when I was like in middle school, I think.
Hmm.
Maybe like 14, something like that, I want to say. Maybe a little older, I can't remember. But it was somewhere around there. I was getting through all of my American Film Institute top 100 movies, and I really dug this film at the time, and it's only improved in my memory ever since then. Um, I think it. So we mentioned slice of life. I don't see that as a bad thing at all. I think it's very appropriate for this kind of story because this is kind of the polar opposite of like an action packed kind of movie. It's because it's about prison, but a prison of the mind, and partially because the people there have mental disorders, but also partially because of how they're made to feel about themselves, because they're
Right.
ostensibly societal rejects for various reasons. Some of whom genuinely need to be there because they do have mental disorders that. If they were alive today, they probably still would need to be there. Then other ones that are more functional, it's like, well, if they got on the right medications, or if they were in a society that was more accepting of them, then they could probably be out and about just fine. And the main group of them that we get to know, yeah, they have their little quirks and little things, but for the most part, they're more functional than some of the other ones who are like almost
Right.
catatonic or whatever. So there is definitely a hierarchy of functionality there, but I really I really love at the performances. I think Jack Nicholson, man, what a 1-2 punch between Chinatown and this, one after the other. But then Milos Forman is a critically acclaimed director whose work I don't think the public would necessarily connect them together, but I've absolutely loved the films of his I've seen, like this and Amadeus, The People versus Larry Flint, Men on the
Right.
Moon, things like that. Some
I
of
think
my
those are
favorite
the four
movies.
I've seen.
Some of my favorite movies.
Mhm.
And but I think it with the slice of life thing, I think it captures some funny moments. It captures really hardcore dramatic moments. It covers the oppressiveness of that kind of environment, especially at a time when the mental health field was very much in its relative infancy, to the point where beyond just like putting people away, which is what they would normally do.
Mhm.
Um, but like when they're trying to treat people, but even then they're doing it in a very kind of what we would now consider a very medieval way.
Mhm.
It definitely captures that feeling of being a prisoner of one's own mind, but also a prisoner of a society that is telling you that you're crazy, or that you should be kept away from people and that kind of stuff. And then you have Nurse Ratched, who doesn't help matters any. Um, it's just a perfect microcosmic representation of how society functions and how people who are different can, if their talents or their whatever that they have going, if they can be leveraged appropriately, then then they can function well. They just have to not be treated, like they're lesser creatures. While at the same time, you can see why this would have been a big hit for the kind of nonconformist, anti-establishment 70s. Jack Nicholson's a great, figure for that kind of a movie. But yeah, I mean, there's very little about it that I don't think is outstanding. I mean, I think it deserves its reputation. I think it is definitely a crown jewel in Jack Nicholson's already illustrious acting crown. And yeah, it deserves every bit of praise it gets. My opinion of it only increases the more times I see it.
Yeah, Nicholson was definitely already a star at this point. Chinatown and Easy Rider and Little Shop of Horrors, and
Yeah.
Little Shop of Horrors was more of a supporting role.
He would
That
go
was
on.
that was more of a cult thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, he would go on to do even greater things, and it's like.
So
Easy Rider needs to be covered on this.
When I said slice of life, I didn't mean it as anything negative. Like, it was just kind of the description I felt fitted best.
Yeah, but
it's not it's not a bad description. This is really, and again, Dane rattled off a bunch of Forman's biggest hits. His movies, you look at them. This one is about primarily Randall P. McMurphy, which was the subject of sore dispute with Ken Casey, who thought it should be about the chief. It was, Amadeus is about, Mozart. You got People versus Larry Flint. Well, obviously. The Man on the Moon, Andy Kaufman, incidentally a co-star on Taxi with DeVito and Christopher Lloyd. Part of the reason why they were involved with that film. Other than just Forman being there. But they're all character-centered films, much more than plot-driven films. They're much more about who these people are, and they're pretty much all of them are nonconformists. And
they all stand out relative to their environment. Plus, like, the other point that I wanted to make with the structure of this thing and the pacing. So you can clearly tell that this was based on a novel, because novels flow in a way that a lot of movies tend not to flow in terms of their story structure. Now, granted, they make it work really, really well in this, but in terms of, and also it came from a period where I think people were more accepting of movies that didn't have to move at a lightning pace, because this was 75 was the year of Jaws, so we were just coming into the age of like the blockbuster as we know it today in terms of pacing. But not only that, but then other Milos Forman films, like, so Amadeus, like you said, real person Mozart, but based on a play, which is historical fiction, and then the other two are biopics, both about people who rebel against the status quo for one reason or another. So there are some definite carryovers in terms of theme.
And it's funny that we're talking about pacing and I know, Dustin, you said over the plot, like, this movie is horrid. Honestly, we're talking about Jack Nicholson's greatest.
I didn't say it was horrid.
I know. I didn't say horrid. You just said kind of boring. But what I was going to say is, like, you could still appreciate a film for its qualities. I know Brandon would agree with me on this. But if we're talking about 70s Jack Nicholson starring films that are indisputed classics, we were both bored by Chinatown. I mean, I was bored by that film. And it's just
well written, but definitely one.
I rewatched it the other day. I loved it even more.
Well, everyone's got their own kick. I know you love Barry Lyndon, but that's slow as a molasses movie. But
actually, have you noticed though that a lot of early Jack Nicholson pieces were very character driven?
Yeah.
Chinatown maybe in the lower end of character driven, because that was close. That was more of a background, but
that was more.
Plot, Easy Rider, some of the horror films that he had done in the past, I wonder, was it Tormented? I can't think of the name of it. But
he was
he
in The
did
Terror.
The Terror, that was the one.
Okay.
The Terror also, but these are things that I think that it was a little bit more well written. But well written doesn't always translate to exciting.
Well,
Right.
and again, I have to put it in context there as far as like, so when the studio system, the classical studio system, when that essentially died in like the late 60s and throughout the 70s, the companies that would later buy the studios, they were just chucking everything at the wall, see what stuck, because they didn't know how to run a movie studio. They just knew how to run a business in general. But that's how the movie brats, the George Lucas, the Steven Spielberg, and Martin Scorsese, that's how they got to be where they were, because the studios were like, we don't know what we're doing. But point being that a lot of the traditional movie structure up to that point was basically gone, and it was deconstructed so you could have a market for those movies that were deconstructionist, and they were more character driven, they were more languid, they, like, I'm thinking of Easy Rider was, very deliberately psychedelic, and things like that, because that's what the audience wanted at the time. You would never see that nowadays, because everything is so processed, and so the expectation is to have things constantly on the move.
I think a movie that's got similar vibes, I guess, in a way, but is structured in a little better to where it's just generally more entertaining for casual watching purposes is like Harold and Maude.
That's a
it's
good
about
movie.
it's a good
Harold
slice
and
of
Maude
life
is-
flick
That's a
about
weird
eccentric
one.
characters, but there's a lot more like wacky hijinks and things.
Right.
It's
I-
just
This one does have some wacky hijinks, which is
It
kind
does.
of interesting. But
They like
The-
steal that boat. Like, what the fuck was that about?
Oh
I
yeah,
love that scene
That
where
was
they steal
awesome.
the boat.
They just like steal a
Yes.
boat for like 20 minutes, and it's like, what is even
Yeah.
happening anymore?
it has
Yeah.
You
some
gotta steal
good.
some boats, man.
There were
It
some
has
good
some
moments there,
significance.
but
Well,
I did
one
wanna-
thing that did puzzle me when I watched it the first time, and then I think I've kind of so when you're asking like what's happening there, because when I first saw it when I was younger, I kind of wondered like, are they not like trying to find them or whatever? Well, I think partially it's because, well, most of the people there are there voluntarily, and so there's not even like maximum security prison kind of situation.
Right.
Yeah, they're not gonna
People-
send out the bloodhounds right away.
Exactly.
It's
Well,
Right.
it's I would say voluntarily is a relative term.
Theoretically, they're voluntary, and
I think it's
actually,
voluntary
that
until you're checked in.
right.
It's,
That was one thing I wanted to. That's something you sometimes see in these movies. Like you I think they did that in Girl Interrupted, if I remember correctly. We'll be talking about that one in a couple weeks. And
so much fun.
one of the
Oh,
ones that I thought about including, but I didn't, was Unsane. But yeah, sometimes you check in voluntarily and you don't check out until they say you check out.
Mhm.
But
I feel like there's several layers of evaluations I've seen
Right.
in other movies where it's like, well, you could say you want to leave and you could probably be fine,
Right.
but if some vindictive ass wants to make you like
Right.
fail those out,
Right.
the ejection
Well, I mean,
stages, then
It's
you're
all
stuck.
and it's all relative to that society's definition of
Right.
what is normal.
You just
or
got to have
acceptable.
fish hawk chuck a friggin' hydrotherapy machine through the window. And you're good.
And
what
that was one point. What's up?
What was it that the last line in Hotel California? You can check out, but you can never leave.
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
I
Yes,
hate
great,
the fucking
great
Eagles,
lyric.
man.
That is a good line to represent that sort of thing.
Right, but I do want to mention actually along those lines. It is interesting that most of them are voluntaries, and actually, when McMurphy finds that out, he's shocked. But most of them do have what might be considered, like nowadays. They were sent in because people were embarrassed by them. That's what it is. You got the stutterer, you got the closet homosexual, you've got the the guy who's just a whiny little weakling that doesn't ever stand up for himself. You know, these are not really mental illnesses. They're just, they were pressured into checking in, to get them out of. Yeah.
But that's also why you see all that is absolutely true. That's also why you do see a hierarchy of functionality take place. So you've got the ones who are of sound enough mind to be at group therapy, who are able to carry on a conversation, that sort of thing. And then you've got people who are just, they're checked out. There's no way that you can possibly reach them, and there's no way that they could exist outside of that facility, and that's just the sad reality. But it is interesting how that's organized.
Right.
I gotta keep in mind also, back in those days, especially in the 70s and 80s, the mental health institutions were portrayed very differently than they've been portrayed in more modern aesthetics. But they are very different as well.
And this is a period piece too, because it's set in the early 60s when the book was written.
A good example being there was a film called The Dream Team, and a lot of times people looked at this as more of a novelty than as something serious to look at. Again, this is something that no people see in reality. You didn't have, most of society did not see inside. It was basically the place that you locked away the people that you didn't like, or the people you were embarrassed by. These were not the sanitariums of old, and but people either used them for kind of an amusement. By the way, I still like the Dream Team, and by the way, also has Christopher Lloyd in it, Connection, but definitely not one. I guess what the word is, ableist, would be the term these days.
Right.
I could see it.
Right. So actually, I as partly, I've been partly yanking the conversation in different directions myself, but I will go ahead and do my actual first impressions, which is, I've seen this film probably 2 times before. I don't know, 2 or 3 times before this viewing. The first time was probably in college. I feel like this is one of those movies that I was introduced to kind of early on once I became more of a film student, if you will. Probably my freshman or sophomore year, if I had to guess. It took me a while to acquire a copy for my collection, but I know I watched it at least once after that. I don't know if there were any viewings in the middle. So this has been my first time for a little while. And I would have liked to read the book. There's a new copy of the book on the shelf at the library I work at. But when Brandon set the order, he put this one first. And I was like, I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to.
Most popular goes first.
I know. You always go most popular to least. And I thought about fighting it. But then I realized something else. We've mentioned Amadeus a few times. Did you realize at any point that you bookended the month with Milos Forman films?
I didn't until we started discussing it today.
So that's pretty cool. I like that, and I'm willing to do that. But I would like to read the book, if only because Ken Casey is famously critical of the film. He vowed to never watch it in its entirety. And apparently he even claimed one night to find it on late night cable, and as soon as he realized what it was, he turned it off. But and again, it largely had to do with point of view and a couple of other little things here and there. But I'll
from my support group with Stephen King.
Well, actually, they do point out on one of the IMDb things that it's interesting that Nicholson and Crothers both starred in something that was disowned by the original author.
Yeah.
And actually, they originally were looking at Shelley Duvall, I think, for Candy.
Yeah.
And she ended up losing out on it, but that would have been an interesting thing.
It's hard to imagine, but yeah.
Yeah, it is a little harder to imagine, I admit. And another also ran was apparently Lily Tomlin was set to play Ratchet, and Louise Fletcher was going to be in Nashville, and they switched at the last minute. So that's kind of an interesting what might have been. But that does bring one interesting thing about this viewing. Brandon touched on each time you watch it, you get something different, which is one of the cool things about revisiting films for this. It's like you never know what you're going to find out. So I rewatched this a couple nights after watching our nominated film from this year for our upcoming awards, I Care a Lot, with Rosamund Pike in the lead role, nominated for actress by us. And I'm sitting here thinking that there is a straight line from Ratchet to her character in the film. If you look at the timeline, you could almost say Ratchet is her grandmother. Because you think about it, Ratchet is so cold that some people consider her a bit sociopathic. I don't think that's necessarily true, and Brandon, you'd know better. But she definitely, I could hear her say, just looking at them and saying, I care. And having it seem just as insincere.
Well, I think her portrayal, Louise Fletcher, out of all the actors in the piece, I think she deserves the biggest round of applause by far.
She did great.
Because here's the amazing thing about her character as written versus R.P. McMurphy as written, and I say as written as opposed to their portrayal, because on paper, why would someone necessarily dislike Nurse Ratched? Because she simply is doing her job, and if you actually listen to the content of her words, nothing that she says on paper is especially cold or anything. And then meanwhile, R.P. McMurphy has served in jail for statutory rape and for being just a generally disruptive person. But then you look at it in application, and it's like, Jack Nicholson has that lovable in spite of his badness quality, and then despite the fact that Nurse Ratched, everything that she says on paper is perfectly okay, the way she says it is so unbelievably cold and menacing, and she is just there to enforce the rules, and she says that she cares, but honestly she is just an enforcer for what is
subtly creepy.
exactly. And but I think that's a
She's got
brilliant
that
it's a brilliant disconnect between someone's actual words and deeds versus the way that they serve up their arguments.
Yeah, she's like Palpatine, how he suggests and pushes and twists minds like they're like toys.
She kind of reminds me of the
performance.
Obviously, she kind of reminds me of the warden from Escape from Alcatraz.
Right.
So Ratched is one of those characters that I felt very differently when I watched it prior to than I have after I've been involved in the field. I looked at her prior to this as basically, it's a simple thing. It's being portrayed, Jack Nicholson's the free spirit. This is the person who is controlling it, as was said, the jailer. So of course she is the bad guy. I look at her currently as more of a product of her time, but also because of some things that we'll discuss later. But that could, by the way, never happen today. Well, without her losing her license and job. But one of the things that is interesting is that I look at her and she's not a very competent. She's a competent enough nurse, but she is not a competent leader of groups. She's not a competent therapist, which is what they use as development. And I'll go into that more later, but they're...
she's very... one thing that I will say is, this is something you kind of get when you get older and you've worked with people or whatever, is that sometimes you have to be rigid. Sometimes you have to seem cold. Be mean, mommy, as they say. Uh, she does take it to an extreme, and especially as he said later on, there are moments where you're like, man, you really bungled that one. But early on, where McMurphy's just acting up, I think she actually comes across as, just someone who means business. It's mostly later where she makes some very questionable calls.
She has no
and-
business leading a mental health group. She has no business leading a therapy
Well, and
group.
what's
Okay.
interesting for her is like she again. I would love to see her and Hal 9000 go on a date. See who could be the more emotionless of the two. I think that would be a pretty interesting challenge. But I think that would be great. But then something that's interesting about her is that again, she just strikes me as following the letter of the procedure, not knowing how or caring to connect with people on a personal level, and also just not knowing when like she lays the law down in some stupid areas or in some less important areas, and then other times there are times when things will just keep going, and it's like she easily could have stopped this,
Right.
so it's like the points where she chooses to stop them versus not are interesting, and it just shows somebody that is only there to enforce the rules as they are on paper and doesn't really care to connect with people, which I mean, we didn't. I haven't seen Patch Adams in its proper context. I remember I watched the Nostalgia Critic review back when I watched him regularly, and I remembered. I remembered that one of his complaints in that film was that bedside manner for the medical profession outside of the psychiatric profession was they were like, were people really this horrible at bedside manner? Well, apparently, at that time, like the 60s,
Yes.
apparently, yeah, bedside manner wasn't that good for regular medical doctors, let alone the psychiatric field.
Right. And then the
very good time to be a sociopath and a doctor.
Yeah, I guess so.
I was trying to understand the real Patch Adams. And then he was, I don't think he ever was. I don't know if he ever did. Wait, did he stay at a? I don't think he ever did stay at a mental institution.
Who are we talking about?
Oh, the real Patch Adams.
Oh, he was in a mental institution for a little while.
All right, so
there was a real Patch Adams.
Yeah,
there was.
Oh yeah,
he's a real person, and
Virginia doctor, I believe.
He was,
he was local to this area. I think.
Patch Adams, he was a real person. He doesn't remotely look anything like Robin Williams, and apparently, the movie detracts pretty heavily from his real life to the point where he was like, this isn't me at all, even though he had nothing against Robin Williams himself.
And it's a fun movie. I mean, I haven't seen it in years.
What do you mean fun? It's like so depressing.
I don't know. I thought it was fun.
Only at the end.
It was a fun movie. There was some
most depressing twist of all time. Like the Soul Crusher. What are you talking about?
One.
Well,
I haven't seen it in years.
The girl who dies was actually a man in real life and was not a romantic interest for Patch at all.
Well, that's disappointing. You only live once, Patch.
That was so messed up. Like that ruined the whole movie. Like it was just like, oh my god, what the fuck?
So anyway. So on that note, let's go ahead. We've already done a pretty fair bit of discussion about characters. I guess particularly. Oh, the point I was going to make. I'm sorry, that was it. As far as Ratchet goes, one thing that is worth noting is. I think, am I remembering correctly that this was Milos Forman's American debut?
Yes.
And he, of course, he of course was a Polish Czech national, and
said the White Rabbit.
Said the White Rabbit, exactly. But one definitely can tell looking at his stuff, we already talked about the anti-establishment streak that he did so often. But you can definitely tell looking at that he kind of had an axe to grind against the government that he
Oh, big time.
expatriated from.
Well,
And
yeah, he was not too pleased with the communist government of the time,
Right.
and even them going back there to Prague to film Amadeus, to try to fake Prague as Vienna, which actually because if you've ever heard him speak in the behind the scenes, he has like this really thick accent. He's like, because of the communist degradation, it looks just like
Yeah.
Vienna, and it's true. But it's like, yeah, he went back there despite being kind of like outcast from his own country, but it was kind of weird for him to be back. But yeah, all his best movies are all about people that rebel and don't fit in.
Right. And geez, what was I going to say? I'm sorry, I lost.
Apparently,
track
Jack
there.
Nicholson didn't really want to talk to Milos during this, which is kind of
No,
weird,
there's
but...
all sorts of reports that they communicated through the camera people. And just, they had very different views on how McMurphy should be handled in the movie, and I guess
we touched on them. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Finish up what you're saying.
Well, I was just going to say, I guess that's what the studio and Forman get for casting a star in the lead, is that they had to deal with the fact that stars have opinions.
Well, and especially and think about what you've got here. So you've got Milos Forman, who, as a director, apparently, so according to Vincent Schiavelli, who was in this film and was in Amadeus, he was saying that Milos can be very abrupt, but he's never wrong. But he would say, to Vincent, like, because all he had to do, like, in that movie was like cross a snowy street to pay a visit to the dying Salieri, and all he had to do was walk across the street, and he was like, "Vinny, television is ruining you." And then the next take, "That was wonderful." And he's like, "I don't know what changed." And so you got that kind of person. Then you got Jack, who he's well known for being Jack, and he plays the Jack Nicholson character who never fit in and always try to get away with a lot. So you got very strong forces that are fighting to prevail.
We've talked a little bit. Obviously, McMurphy and Ratchet are the central characters to at least most people. Again, there's some debate on who should be the central characters. We'll get to that in a minute. But we've covered both of them decently. Does anyone have?
I can kind of understand.
Mo, you were starting to.
I'd throw out there that I guess, you guys pointed out pretty well how when you first watch the movie, like younger, Ratchet comes across as more of a straight up villain, but then you kind of, wrap your head more around the situation as you watch it in subsequent viewings, and it changes a little bit. And I would say the same thing kind of goes with old Randall for me. Like, as a younger person, I was like, this guy's fucking awesome.
Right.
But as I get older, I realize, he went up the river on a bit of a statch charge, you know what I mean?
Yep.
He's generally kind of a scumbag. He's that dude that you'd be friends with because you're in jail, not because he's the type of dude you'd just bond with at a barbecue.
That honestly, that's what I always, even as a kid, I always liked I say kid, like middle school, whatever, however old I was. I liked the fact that R.P. McMurphy, like, he's our protagonist, but he's not really like a good guy necessarily, and he's but he's also not really presented as a good guy. He's more someone that, like, again, he's the most normal out of all these people here, which is saying a lot.
They're kind of neutral. They're kind of neutral on him.
Yeah, well, but that's what I like about it. I like that there are no clear-cut, good guys or bad
There are no
guys.
heroes.
Exactly, and
Right.
I tend to like movies like that.
Mhm.
I can, from what I understand, if the author's intention was to make the chief the main character, I can see why that would have worked in a novel because the chief, what does he do for most of the movie? He quite literally stands there and
Right.
observes.
Silent observer.
Yeah,
Apparently, the
which makes
novel is
perfect sense for a novel to do.
apparently the novel is narrated from his viewpoint, and
Yeah.
Casey wanted to do that. He wanted narration from the chief for most of the film,
Mm.
and I can see from a filmmaking stance of, well, that
That wouldn't have
works.
worked.
That works in some cases, but one of the delights in the film is the reveal that he can actually talk. Like,
Yeah.
he
Yes.
looks like a big hulking mass of deaf mute that no one can communicate with or reach, and he plays that to the hilt with his interactions with Murphy. He slowly starts interacting with him until finally he just kind of, lets him know once and for all. Oh yeah, I'm just faking it.
Well, and it's
It's a
also
prototype for the Silent Bob reveal. If you
little bit, but also it's a key difference in medium because
Mhm.
in a novel you
Mhm.
do tend to either need the omniscient narrator or you need a
Mhm.
protagonist, who is narrating the thing. And
Mhm.
usually that works the best if it's someone that is fairly neutral and someone through whom the reader can get to know this world, unless the whole point is that it's an unreliable narrator. But then you
Right.
have film, which film is all about behavior, especially in a character piece like this. Film is all about behavior and about
Mhm.
learning who a character is as character does. And
Mhm.
this movie is all about that. And
Mhm.
and the nice thing about, well, this film in particular, but also Milos Forman films in general, is that not only is character is as character does, but also Milos Forman would take a lot of care to make sure that the bit parts, the smaller supporting roles,
Right.
were filled with actors who had very distinct faces and were very clear. They could communicate character traits very clearly, very quickly.
I
And
think there are,
you see that here. And
yeah.
this is kind of a special case because again, their behaviors are very heightened because of the
Mhm.
environment they're in. But you even see that in Amadeus, where he took
Right.
quite a lot of care to make sure that the people in the emperor's court, were
Right.
very distinct looking and they could communicate behavior quickly because especially with a large cast, you tend to forget who
Yeah.
people are, so that helped them to stick in the audience's mind.
Well, yeah, like Christopher Lloyd has a very distinctive face. Vincent Chiavelli, oh my God,
Oh
I don't
man.
know there's anyone that looks like him. And it's like, yeah, they definitely stand out.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Jack Nicholson
all the
scared
people.
me as a kid.
Yeah.
Because
Well, there's a reason why he's kind of the intimidating ghost in Ghost, and then eventually they
right,
realize, oh wait, he's the mentor figure. But
this is my train. That part
yeah.
rules.
right,
Well, but think about it here. You've got taller, like really tall people. You have really small people. You
right.
have people who are really loud, people who are really quiet. You've
Mhm.
got people who can attempt to put together a coherent sentence, people who cannot do that whatsoever. You've got stuttering people. You've got
Mhm.
people that scream in anger versus just there's
Mhm.
a wide variety of human behavior in this.
Right. And
well,
so on those, like, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit. What I am curious, like, what everyone's take is on the chief as a character, Chief Bromden as a character. Um, what y'all
Unfortunately,
think?
like I said, a lot of my viewing of it is painted with fishhawk. If you guys have never
Uh-huh.
seen that movie, you need to check it out. He does a great
Okay.
job in this, but God, I just love
Right.
fishhawk. He like hunts a boar. It's awesome.
For me, he only really stood out like at the end.
Mhm.
And I liked him at the end when he kind of got more of an opportunity to kind of do something.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and again, I think that's partially the point, that he has been a very purposeful fly on the wall.
Presence.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I think he works
a very
well.
purposeful fly on the wall in terms of his behavior, but physically,
Mhm.
his presence is there, very
Yeah,
powerfully
so it
because he's
allows
just so
you can't
massive.
forget that he's there because he's him,
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
And then when he finally gets to use what he's got, it's worth the wait, you know.
And actually, just talking about his physical presence, apparently he was written in the book to be this huge guy, and they were starting to give up trying to cast him. And apparently, one of the Douglases, I think it was Kirk Douglas, met a guy on a plane who's was a car salesman, I believe, and he said he'd keep an eye out because he dealt with a lot of Native Americans. And he apparently called once the movie came into production a few months after. He was like, "I just met the biggest son of a..." and but apparently that guy ended up. He was the one who played the harbor master in the film. So they did have an interesting mix of professionals and non-actors in this film. But I just thought that was kind of interesting. But
Well, some of the
Oh, man.
background extras actually were real mental
yes,
patients that were
yes, a
there.
lot of them were.
I think a
I
lot of
totally
the
forgot
stuff.
for a minute that he's the Native American shaman dude in Poltergeist 2.
I think a lot of it, when you think about the book, for instance, that he is the observer and the main character, it plays out as well as you would expect it to when it comes to just, well, he's the narrator. So in a way, this works very well because, yeah, it's perfectly illustrated as a movie could illustrate the person who is observing everything. So I think that he did an excellent job portraying the character and doing it well.
The chief kind of reminded me of Creepshow. They had this one piece called Chief Woodenhead.
Hell
It-
yes.
Oh yeah.
The cigarette,
Bless you,
the
Roger.
cigar Indian guy that comes to life and takes care of business.
Oh, we know Chief Woodenhead.
So I do want to do one more character before we get into the actual plot, and there's a few others. If y'all want to bring any up and talk about, that's fine. But I want to definitely make sure we talk a little bit about Billy Bibbit, who's the Brad Dourif character.
His film debut.
Yes, Nicholson and Louise Fletcher, of course, won Oscars for this. This is notable, actually. This is only the second of 3 films to win the so-called Grand Slam.
Yeah.
Picture, director, actor, actress, and screenplay. And It Happened One Night was the first one, Silence of the Lambs the other. And just like with the Silence of the Lambs, it's kind of bullshit because Louise Fletcher has an even shorter role than Anthony Hopkins did in Silence. They both really should have been in the supporting category, but they're just such a big presence in the film that it's like that's what people remembered, So, yeah. But anyway, Dourif was actually nominated for supporting actor for this role, and he basically plays a scared kid. He's like, what, 21, 22. He's not old at all. And he stutters heavily. He's very insecure and doesn't stand up for himself. And we kind of find out why late in the movie. But yeah, you kind of get the impression that he probably had a mother even more domineering than our Nurse Ratched here. So, what are y'all's take on Billy, though?
It was at the moment that I watched this movie that I realized for the first time, like, damn, one of Brad Dourif's main traits is he got some moist eyes, boy. Like, his eyes are always getting all moist when you watch him in movies.
Well, his mom probably admitted him because of his furry palms, also.
Probably.
Actually, one could say he's an early representation of borderline personality. A lot of people look at borderline personality and they think Fatal Attraction. That's what it looks like. It's not necessarily. If you notice, a lot of his stuff, his suicide attempt followed a rejection when he had asked the girl he liked to marry him, Coupled with that and a lot of fear of rejection from his mother, who was the only woman in his life. Sorry, putting on my therapist cap here.
Right.
That's all right.
But who was the only
You
woman
are
in
welcome
his
to
life
do so.
that had kind of accepted him. That fear of rejection is actually centered to it. The only thing that has not been played is other than the mood swings, which you see the mood swings, but you don't see necessarily the polarized thinking. But there's not enough really time to see that, which also goes to show you when Nurture Rap does what would be today a major threat of HIPAA violation, which would not happen today. If she had said what she had said then and it got out, she would be fired, lose her license, and never work again. You wouldn't even have had to get to the point where the suicide happened.
Right.
But this character does a pretty good job of portraying these things.
The obviously electroshock therapy and full-blown lobotomies were more common back then. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think lobotomies are really in effect anymore, but I do think but aren't there some, I didn't think so, but aren't there some instances where at least some limited or targeted electroshock therapy is still around?
Electroshock is actually a highly effective therapy tool.
Yeah.
But it's a last resort because though science does not know how, and no, it's not done like they do it there anymore, the science has still not quite figured it out. Electroshock actually is an effective way to alleviate depression in ways that are basically so stubborn that you cannot push it. So if you've tried every medicine there is, you just like suicide attempt after suicide attempt, and nothing else works, or you're so psychotic and withdrawn. Here they're using it as a punitive measure, which. But again, the psych facilities back then had no ethics. We're talking a time period where one leading psych study was to take kids who were learning how to drive, throw realistic dummies in front of the car so that they would run them over, and then measure the responses telling that kid that they killed that person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So
damn.
not debriefing afterwards, by the way.
Well, it's you remember the famous Tom Cruise Matt Lauer interview where like he got off on the whole I've never agreed with psychiatry when I even before I was a Scientologist I never agreed with psychiatry, that whole thing. It's like, well, and not in the defense of Scientology, which is hardly a good countermeasure.
Not a good
countermeasure. Tell Tom.
No.
Yeah, it's hardly a good it's hardly a good solution, but at the same time, it's like when you're looking at like the earliest histories of the field, it's like we've come a long way. Let's just say that.
That's kind of interesting. Like I had no idea like electroshock was still like in use or was actually a useful technique.
I think they use it for all types of other therapies.
It's kind of funny. In that Dead by Daylight game I talk about, one of my favorite killers is the Doctor, and his power is like a shock therapy attack.
Wow.
And most of his equipment are like different types of electrodes and like file folders for different treatment techniques.
Yeah.
And he has a bunch of quotes like, "It's time for your treatment."
Now,
let us not forget too, it can be a good time if applied properly. I do remember that guy in Demon Knight that had like the jumper cables attached to his nips, and he seemed
well, and it's just like anything. I mean, people like
he has abilities with names like monitor and abuse. So that should give you the idea.
People like to always kind of look down on modern medicine as like, oh, they just throw a pill at you and that kind of stuff, which that can be the case, but at the same time, it's just but it's just like anything. You get on the right kinds of things and it works well. You're on the wrong kinds of things, it doesn't work so well.
Yeah, it beats a drill bit to the brain.
Exactly.
It just modern psychiatry is throw a pill at it, but.
Well, but you know what I mean. It's like if you're on the right stuff or you get treated the right way, then it's going to work. If you don't, it won't.
Eventually, hand saws and chisels.
So
Well,
I think
yeah.
I was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
Brandon seems like he's been trying to say something for a minute here.
Go for it.
Well, I mean, basically, psychiatry back then was based off of two purposes. You had Freud, who is a quack and
Is that the
a
guy who thinks
terrible
everything's dicks or
individual.
whatever?
Freud is one of the most
Pretty
terrible
much.
and damaging people to the field ever, and he's the founder of it. And
Damn.
and then
Tell us how
also,
you really feel.
I don't like Freud. He's a fraud. He based Freud's entirety was based. He did a test of multiple women, like 100 women, and he ended up being unsuccessful with any of them. So he therefore concluded that my therapy method is a success. It just doesn't work on women.
I know
And
that common
Everything
criticism.
is dick.
I know a common criticism of Freud is that his theories were sexist, which I think is pretty indisputable relative
Right.
to,
Well, as George Carlin said, sometimes a cigar is a cigar. Well, sometimes it's a big brown dick.
Yeah.
But and then there's
It's true,
Skinner
though.
at the other end of the deal back then, and Skinner is purely behavioral. And the Skinner method is unfortunately what you also see with a lot of the cold, terrible experimentation that you see in those days. So,
Right.
in any
Well,
case,
though I think
yeah.
wasn't it true that Skinner's as often kind of heartless or mechanical as they were, that his methods did achieve results as far as like actually training people and animals to behave in a certain way.
Well, yeah, using a choker chain on a dog to teach him how to do things is very effective too, but it's not necessarily ethical.
Right. So
I mean, back then, it sounds like you were hoping you got the MK Ultra hospital where they were just giving you acid. You know?
Actually,
Just
that's
seeing
kind of
what
funny because part of the Doctor's backstory in the game is like the MK Ultra program.
Hell yeah.
Well, let's just say that there's a reason why old psych hospitals are considered horror facilities.
Right. Well, you should have seen the one that
That's his
I
map.
toured.
Leary's Memorial Institute.
You should have seen the one that I toured. I seriously, that could have been a great place for a horror film. But at any rate, so we'll go ahead and get into, as we've pointed out before, this is not a plot-heavy film, but there is a plot, and basically it follows the trajectory of Randall P. McMurphy, having been judged apparently to be insane, is taken to a facility for observation, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And he tells the doctor straight up, "Nah, man, I'm not crazy. I'm just, but he does have that wild, unkempt kind of like he refuses to be. You get the impression that the doctor looks at this guy and goes, "Yeah, you're probably faking it, but we can set you straight." He kind of.
he never for 1 second to me came off as insane, like in the clinical definition of insane. He definitely came across as like a rebel, 100%.
Right.
He came across like Barfly.
Yeah, a little bit.
He's Jack Nicholson's almost like if anybody's familiar with comics, there's a Batman story called Arkham Asylum Living Hell, and it's about a convict who basically successfully pleads insanity so that he'll get sent to Arkham Asylum instead of going to prison. But while he's in Arkham Asylum, he gets driven insane and becomes a villain called White Shark.
If you weren't crazy before, a place like that would make you crazy. That's for sure.
And as we mentioned before, there are Batman connections here. Actually, one that I read that I think I've heard before, but I'm not sure.
Well, during a riot, he gets thrown into Mr. Freeze's cell, and his nose and ears freeze off, so he becomes maimed too.
That doesn't sound so fun. But I had read, and I feel like this is a missed opportunity, and shame on Warner Brothers for being afraid to stick with Tim Burton. But apparently, Burton had wanted Brad Dourif to play Scarecrow in the next one, and that's
Oh
like
my
that
God.
would have been great.
That would have been pretty cool.
amazing.
I mean, I-
He's underrated for
Scarecrow.
other characters. He tends to
I,
get thought of
uh,
as just Chucky, but he's in a lot of
Right.
good stuff. Shout
I-
out to Passing
I
Through
loved,
Destiny, which is an amazing Babylon
He is a
5
very
episode.
good
Right.
actor. Like he's got a lot of range too, and not a lot of people
Mhm.
realize that since he's so popular for Chucky now.
Exactly.
I loved Cillian Murphy, but let me tell you, Brad Dourif as the Scarecrow. That sounds like
Sounds
a match made in
bone-chilling.
heaven right there.
Not to mention that I
But
really
only
think
if he were the main villain, though, not like a
Right.
secondary villain.
I
not to
almost,
mention that Burton
almost-
would be a good director for a Scarecrow feature.
Oh yeah.
oh
still think-
definitely.
I still think Darren Aronofsky would be the best for that, but you know,
I almost wonder
would-
if Dourif
No,
really
I
would
read
be
I
that.
read Aronofsky's Batman script. It was bad.
I almost wonder if Dourif
Well-
actually would be all that good for Scarecrow, because Dourif has kind of like a creepy presence to him, but Scarecrow, when he's outside of the costume, is supposed to be kind of a dorky, like awkward guy, and Cillian Murphy really nailed that.
I
Like,
thought
he's
he was
supposed to be-
scary.
He's supposed
I
to be
thought he
very
was-
non-threatening out of the costume.
I thought he was
think-
scarier without the mask on.
Honestly, I think Dorf could have pulled it off, especially if he could.
oh yeah,
I mean, he did a good job in that B5 episodes that I mentioned, Passing Through Destiny. And he plays like a serial killer that they've mind wiped and turned into a pacifist. And then obviously people remember that he was a fucking serial murderer. So they mess with him until it eventually, spoiler alert, it comes back out. But you know what I mean? Like, he does a really good job of playing that meek pacifist dude in between. So he could probably pull it off with Scarecrow. We just
So
haven't got
I
to
can
see a
see
lot
it,
of
I guess,
that.
then.
So speaking of messing with people, and I wonder, Brandon, if this is part of what you're talking about Ratchet not being the very competent. We are introduced to these group sessions. I think as McMurphy comes into the ward, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And these sessions frequently go off the rails. Sometimes spectacularly so.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of times these characters are just messing with each other. You've got, we've already talked to, Billy, he's kind of quiet and shy and sticks to himself as much as he can. You got Martini, who I'm not really, the Danny DeVito character, I'm not really positive what his deal is, but he smiles a whole lot. And he always insists on repeating things.
He's the
again
first
and again.
one to be pervy on the ship.
Yeah. And he was actually, Danny DeVito played this role on stage, and he was the first one cast because they wanted to bring him back for the role. But you got Christopher Lloyd plays Tabor, who clearly has some severe anger management issues, but there may be something more going on there. You got Sidney Lassick as Cheswick, who again is very apologetic, is very, very insecure, is always
until he grows kind of a spine, and then he becomes insufferable, even more insufferable.
And then you got I read that Vincent Schiavelli plays Fredrickson, and you got this other guy, Seafelt, I think was his name, is played by William Dewell, who I read they were epileptic. You don't really see in the movie. They're just kind of there. There's that thing about them switching medications, but you don't get a whole lot about what they're really in for. And then William Redfield, who's really the one, Harding is the one they really, really tear into a lot. He's the one who is very probably gay, but, not able to express it because, this is like the 60s. And
yeah.
And they really are merciless against him. He's very well spoken. He's intelligent. He probably also thinks more of himself than he really should, and that doesn't help him make friends. So McMurphy comes into this display of these people. I think they were talking about Harding's relationship with his wife in that first meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
They
I
Yeah.
remember her,
And
R.P. McMurphy gets in there, and he's just a complete loose cannon in this
Mhm.
very orderly, very structured place. And obviously, he like explicitly sets out to make Nurse Ratchet's life a living hell. You know,
Oh,
Well, yeah, he
he
makes a
takes
bet.
bet.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
He
Yeah.
makes the bet that he could do it by the end of the week for $25 or some shit like that.
Yeah.
Right.
$1.
Yeah, back in the '60s, it was
$1.
like 40. You know, something.
At least.
That's a good chunk of change, yeah.
Well, and I do
Oh.
love that he eventually rids his contemporaries of their cigarettes and their money.
Right. And actually he does get under her skin, at which point she locks up everyone's cigarettes and what have you. And I believe when Cheswick makes the complaint, I believe Martini's like, how do we get our money back from McMurphy?
Yeah.
And they were like, and she's just like, well, you don't.
Yeah. Well, and in all fairness, like, I'll give her that one. It's like, really, what is she supposed to do about stuff that they do between themselves
Right.
that has nothing to do with their treatment? You know,
I
that's
mean,
kind
yeah,
of their problem.
Martini and Cheswick are both terrible card players. Martini because he's always like, hit me, hit me, hit me,
Yeah.
hit me. And Cheswick has like the worst poker face I think I've ever seen in a movie.
Well, I think he's got the worst poker face in life just because he's incapable of hiding his emotions in any way.
Right. So, meanwhile, you're introduced to the chief, and McMurphy takes an interest in him. Everyone else is like, oh, he's just deaf and dumb, he's just, kind of here. But McMurphy kind of, he gets him to play basketball, and really the chief starts to, again, he's really good at ratcheting it down a little at a time. But I feel like he almost kind of breaks character a little bit in that one basketball game where he actually starts smiling. And I think anyone who was paying attention would probably be like,
I love how he can go from one side of the court and in like two strides go to the other side.
And I was watching that scene and I was like, oh, he has the serial killer walk down pat.
Yeah.
Or like the slasher villain walk where he doesn't have to walk fast and yet he covers a lot of distance.
Those smaller guys got to worry about the cardio. Learned that from Leslie Vernon.
Right.
One thing I will say about the group running is, and one of the reasons why I consider her more incompetent when it comes to this, is she does not control her group at all.
No.
She comes up with, she purposefully gets to subjects that do create conflict. She has difficulty reading a room.
Yeah.
Which, I'm sorry, if you've worked in a psych hospital for any long period of time and you've known these people, you should be able to read the freaking room. And she doesn't bring it under control. As authoritarian as she is, she lets them amp it up to near riot levels before she finally says, oh, okay, well, I guess they're getting ready to tear apart the unit. I guess I should stop it right
Well,
now.
the director said something about the fact that that Nurse Ratchet is technically supposed to be evil, but supposedly he thought it was a better idea that the nurse have no idea that she is evil, no idea, no consciousness that the things she is doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what he brought out in Nurse Ratchet as a character. I don't think she was that way in the novel.
Well, I really love the way that Louise Fletcher plays her for that exact reason, because I think most people that are she's definitely a cog in the machine, and a very deliberate, very willful one. Or thankful to be there, as a just total cog in the machine. She doesn't really strike me as terribly sadistic per se, for the simple reason that sadism it would imply that a person was capable of getting some kind of pleasure out of anything, let alone the
Right.
suffering of others. She just comes across as unbelievably mechanical. She kind of is, speaking of the other movie that Brandon loves so much, she kind of is a Clockwork Orange in the sense that she looks like a human but acts very robotic. And so yeah,
Which is
wouldn't.
also which is also part of the reason I drew the connection to I Care a Lot, because again, that character, she is basically the capitalist system personified, with no room for emotion or anything else like that, or pesky things like morals and ethics.
Because
All about the money.
if
Yes.
Nurse Ratched were an actual sadist, I think you would get a lot more overtly overtly sadistic behavior, and you'd see her enjoying it more and that kind of stuff. She really
I
comes
think she
across like
gets a
maybe a little
she
bit, but
gets a small thrill, but not. It's not
yeah.
her driving force.
Well, and it would it would imply that she had more of a sense of pleasure just in general, to feel anything, even if it was at the expense of others. She just comes across like someone who's so unbelievably dead inside.
Right. So what we have plot-wise from here on is mostly a series of vignettes. You got a little bit happens here, a little bit. We have group. Dustin, you're not entirely wrong to call it a slice of life, because it's kind of has that. It's like little episodes here and there of the interaction between these characters and McMurphy and Ratched, and there's the gradually building sense that, like, more and more they're all kind of attaching themselves to McMurphy. They're more and more he is influencing them mostly for the better, but not all.
Yeah.
Some
Well,
of them.
it's a power game. It's a power struggle,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
takes place gradually. And you see, again, it's definitely the pacing of a novel. But I honestly, the group therapy scenes are some of my favorites, just because each one you don't know what you're gonna get, and the whole thing is definitely a pressure cooker that does
Right.
explode, pretty much every time, but to
Right.
variously, some incidents are more severe than others. But yeah, every time you get these very eccentric people together with very particular personalities that are working at cross purposes with each other, you put them together and you watch them build up and blow up. That's really what it is. But those are some of the best acting movies that there are. You take, very distinct personalities, you put them together and you watch them blow.
Right. And of course, this one does lead eventually to the one vignette that we mentioned, that was actually apparently I think they filmed most of it in order, and then they came back and filmed this scene. And supposedly every single person but Nicholson got seasick on that boat. I read that Danny DeVito doesn't even like to talk about it because it's but
Jack Nicholson wouldn't get seasick. He would
No.
deliberately make you seasick, though, I'm sure.
But I do have to admit, like, one of my favorite moments in the movie, and I guess it's not entirely appropriate to do any it's not entirely I guess au courant to be amused by any sort of bullying, and this kind of is what this is, but the way it's done, it's played off so comedically, and I just absolutely loved it. And that was the scene with the harbor master. They've gone down to the harbor and they've chosen a boat and they've hopped aboard, and the harbor master comes up. Wait, who are you people? Why are you on this boat? Like, you can't take this boat. And then Nicholson, without missing a beat, he's like, "Oh, well, we're here from the state mental hospital, and I'm Dr. McMurphy, and this is Dr. Cheswick. And then he goes down the line and introduces,
Dr.
including his
Seafeld.
girlfriend, Dr. Seafeld, all of them, Mr. Harding, and and just every one of them was a doctor except for Harding. And I know that was kind of mean spirited, but I really I was amused by that, and but mostly I was amused by Harding's reaction. He was so upset. I think not that they got singed like that, but that he couldn't be a doctor.
Well, I mean,
Hey
you
man,
know,
there's nothing wrong with enjoying a bit of cinematic bullying as long as it's not like uncomfortable and you don't
Right.
like that shit in real life. You know, I've seen Karate Kid like 3 times recently just
Yeah.
for the sweet fucking
mean,
80s
yeah.
bullying in there.
That would be some nasty ass prank that McMurphy pulled in real life, no doubt about it. But again, in context in the film, it was pretty damn funny.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. I think of it more like wrestling, like heels. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a little
Like a
bit.
good
Right.
villain or a good bully in a especially an '80s movie. They had it dialed
Right.
back then, dude. He runs
Mhm.
over her boombox after kicking friggin' Daniel's ass. Like that's so classic. That's just such a classic '80s bully thing to do.
Right.
You know? So
Well, there's
And
it
then
can
there's
be
a-
fun,
there's
but
a
in real
difference.
life, I would probably,
Yeah.
I don't know, fuck that dude up or something.
Well, there's a difference between what's nice versus what's funny, you know,
Right.
and oftentimes those things can be kind of opposed to each other because, well, you know, life is not especially nice.
Mhm.
You know, that doesn't give people in real life excuses to be nasty to each other. But it's
Right.
just, you know what I mean. It's
Right.
like the expectation that for something to be funny, it has to also be, you know, nice or whatever. That's not
Right.
I find that those
Well,
things rarely go together.
Yeah, they're often at odds with one another, no doubt about it. And like the scene that follows is somewhat at odds with reality too, because I mean, really, if you had all these people together on the boat, it makes for a good comedy, but it might have been a little more chaotic and ended a little differently.
Yeah, for sure.
It,
Someone's
it,
going in to drink, search and rescue's getting called out.
right.
It's gonna
Which-
end
But-
bad.
And I mean,
But the
for
way-
all we know, stuff like that might have happened.
Right.
Maybe not that. Well, I mean, it ends
Right.
with them like the boat's going in a circle because, of course,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
does.
Right, yeah. You basically McMurphy takes them all out to sea with his girlfriend, and he basically teaches Cheswick to drive the boat, and teaches everyone else how to fish, but in the most
Mac,
offhanded, like,
Mac.
yeah,
That
and
throughout the whole thing.
then of course he decides to go into the cabin with Candy, his girlfriend, and have a little good time.
Yeah.
And I think Martini first, followed by everyone else, decides to come around to the front and look through the windows.
Because
then-
of course they do.
Cheswick looks down from, where'd everyone go? He just freaks out.
Which out of I mean, I love the supporting cast in this. I think
Mhm.
they're really, really strong. I
Mhm,
think that he always Sidney Lassick is his name.
mhm.
He always stuck out in my head. I don't know what it is,
Mhm.
but there's just something about his look, his voice, his just
Mhm.
like he will not be calm and satisfied. It's just like there's something about that always stuck out to me. I think just because again
Mhm.
he was so intense in it.
Right.
And he actually was in Shakes the Clown, and he was in Cool as Ice as well.
Mhm.
But it's and he was in Men on the Moon too.
Yes,
Uh,
that was actually his second to last, I
Second
guess,
to last.
film role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's he has such a distinct look and
Mhm.
voice, and it's like, oh, you cannot forget him. And
Mhm.
that's I've often dreamed of being like a really great
Right.
I've often dreamed of being a really great character actor or cameo actor or bit actor or
Mhm.
whatever. And he's
Mhm.
definitely one of the greats. Him and Vincent Schiavelli both.
Right. And I guess I should mention, as far as the various actors go, and we talked about how many of these people were early in their careers and would go on to do great things. The one who plays Harding, William Redfield, was actually diagnosed with leukemia during filming, and he
Oh.
passed away shortly after. So that he ended up doing this right at the end. But for a swan song, you could do worse.
I think
Yeah.
what's Will Sampson? He didn't do too many movies either. I
No.
think he had a longer career, but he just selectively kind of
And
did
before
shit.
Yeah.
and before taking this role, he was a forest ranger. So
Hell yeah.
I guess one of the actors, I forget which of the actors, actually like knew him or saw him, and he was like to the director, "You got to come see this guy. He's a big fella." You
Right.
know,
Well,
Like,
like Zed, yeah,
'cause
the
he-
dude that plays the harbor master.
he didn't know that many large Indians, so
Yeah.
he had a few people keep a lookout for him.
I
Right.
like the fact that this movie does effectively cast some non-actors in there, because I do think that if you're able to get people who are as close to the real life equivalent as possible, then that helps to add to the veracity. A
Right.
classic example, or they were that thing at one point. Like I'm thinking of Arlie Ermy in Full Metal Jacket. He
Right.
was a real life drill sergeant, so it's like, well, yeah, if you can get the real thing, then go for it, because it's going to be more realistic than if you tried to reverse engineer it.
And apparently Milos Forman was a big fan of the Cinema Verite movement, and so that makes sense that he would have tried to go as as big on that as he could. So of course they have that little adventure, and there's another little adventure. Well, not an adventure, but I'm trying to remember if it was before or after the boating trip, where they had that discussion where Cheswick just lost it because he wanted his cigarette.
Where's my
Yeah.
cigarettes?
It was right after the boating incident
Yeah.
where that happened.
Well, it's because he got
because-
his confidence back.
Right.
And they were talking about, and the reason why she restricted the cigarette was because of the boating trip, because they wanted to pay for the damage done on the exit, which was a punitive thing. And this is something that is not done very often, but is done in at least one hospital here in Virginia, which is cigarettes used to be utilized as a way to help control behavior. They would actually purposefully addict people to cigarettes in the hospitals in order to utilize that addiction as a way to help control behaviors and say, if you do these things, you'll get this number of cigarettes.
I see.
Now, there is one hospital that still kind of utilizes that today, but all the rest of the hospitals in Virginia tend to frown on smoking in the hospital.
Well, I was gonna say, that's you talk about not ethical but effective. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, the addicting them to it is fucked. If they're already in there previously addicted to cigarettes, like as a smoker myself, if I did something in a facility and they wanted to be like, you don't get any smokes for a while, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
But behave long
intentionally
enough to
doing
get them back.
Well, I mean, also keep in mind that like a good portion of people who have mental health issues are avid smokers.
And if I remember correctly, this scene devolved into chaos, where not only Cheswick but McMurphy and even the chief end up getting carted upstairs to the other ward.
Yeah.
And
punitive electroshock.
The punitive electroshock, yes. And so that kind of starts the clock ticking for McMurphy. He's already been talking. This is when he learns that the chief can actually talk, and they already had a little bit of a bond, but they really kind of bonded in this little moment, which was it's a nice little moment. I enjoy that. And again, I enjoy the reveal, which would have been kind of spoiled with narration. I think.
Agreed.
But the so they go back. Well, first of all, when McMurphy comes back, he tries to fool everyone into thinking he's now a vegetable. And he does that for about 2 minutes, and then he just kind of like, just laughing.
Yeah, that was
Just
great.
kidding. Just kidding. Look out, I'm normal.
Exactly. And then, but he has already decided he and the chief are going to escape, and they've started. This chief gives them this really nice little speech about why he's really in there, and doesn't really. He doesn't really feel comfortable with trying to leave, but he wants to support McMurphy's efforts and whatever. But then this leads to the big boiling point, if you will, of the party.
The party.
Yes, where
That's definitely turning up the screw.
right. Basically, McMurphy smuggles candy into the hospital along with a friend, and a whole bunch of booze. And they choose a night where pretty much everyone's gone home except for the night guard Turkle, who's our Scatman Crothers character. They bribe him.
I feel bad. I feel sad. I feel sorry for him.
I do
It
too.
really wasn't his.
Like
that poor man is never working again.
Yeah, unfortunately,
hijacked into a crazy night of wine, women, and song.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my god! What the heck happened?
One of the things that I really love about this film, so obviously a masterpiece of a movie, but it is a period piece. It was set over 10 years prior to when it was made. And so it's definitely a commentary on, so there's the kind of people that are in the institution, there are the kind of people that are running it, and then there are the people who are kind of the service people, and you've got, people that have various mental disorders who have various levels of severity within that, but then you've got doctors who look like the most like white bread kind of the period, like early 60s, just really old stuffy people without a heartbeat practically. And then of course all the service people are women and minorities of various sorts, and it's like, that is kind of a decent makeup of the structure of the world at that time. And so it definitely is a good microcosm of that. And then you look and you see how much things have hopefully changed for the better across the board.
Yeah, the only thing that they were leaving out was that there probably would have been a lot more people of color on those units.
Like actually as patients?
As patients, because that was unfortunately one of the... When they talk about institutionalized racism, no, literally institutionalized racism, where they would actually take people who were, to use the term, uppity, and they would essentially lock them up. I have actually interviewed people, I've talked to people in the past, who have been sitting in the state hospitals for upwards of 30 years, all because they spoke up to the wrong white person the wrong way.
Yeah. And I would assume in this case it would be dependent on as that I'm sure is even more prominent like in the South and stuff like that. In this case, like this is in Oregon, which is not to say that it couldn't have happened there. It's just
it could easily have happened in Oregon.
Yeah,
I'm
think
sure.
because we're more liberal Northwest hippie motherfuckers that wouldn't be the case. But we had some weird laws that were on the books until even just recently. So.
Yeah, well, I'm saying more like population-wise / probability-wise, but
you'd probably be less likely to have somebody sending that person there for that reason. But I'm sure it still happened.
I'm very much sure it did, but I totally can see where you're coming from there.
I think you get sent to women too got fucked over a lot by that, because I feel like I've watched documentaries where they talk about how you could get sent there for like postpartum depression or just normal women problems.
It was very easy
hysteria.
To get. Hysteria is a big thing, and it you could very easily get someone committed, often against their will, in the early days. Oh,
And
I do think they don't really make explicit mention of that in this film. I like to think that this hospital had separate female wards.
yeah, they would have.
you would hope so, because otherwise, those furry palms would be doing their business in ways you don't
Yeah,
right.
necessarily
I
want them
would
to.
sincerely think so. This
So
gender thing has come out just recently about you can choose to be one person or another person because you think so. So I think in this time period, people are still thinking that there's girls and there's guys, but I don't think they would separate people like that because they still had a feeling that society needs to have some sort of order, some sort of
Right.
definition of what you are and what you might be. But not like now when it's more fluid. Now people are thinking they're more fluid.
Well, with old Reggie being a little lecherous going into it too, they might have been losing their money in different ways than poker.
Yeah, they would have
had access to women.
What was the it was I watched Dave, one of your nominated films the other night, The Craft Legacy. I think they repeatedly used the phrase David Duchovny of all people. It was interesting seeing him in that role, saying I think it was "order is power," and I could see that being Ratchet's mantra in a sense too, because she is all about order, But again, she's selective in how she enforces it. But at the end of the day, with this party, in a sense, you're left wondering if McMurphy really wanted to escape, because he had to know if he didn't get his ass out that window, there'd be hell to pay.
In trouble.
Basically, they get the girls in, they get the booze in, they start dancing, they start having a good old time, they start, getting a little crazy, a little wild. He's all set to go. He's by the window, and then he goes and one last word with Billy, and he's like, and Billy keeps asking about Crystal. He's taking a likeness to her, and he's like, "Hey, is she going to be there?" And you think maybe you might be able to help me get a date with her or something, and McMurphy's like, well, why wait, basically? And, so he gives them, he hooks them up, and, Crystal's game for it. And, old Billy gets himself a pretty fun few hours.
Puts those furry palms to good use.
That's of course, one of the two opportunities he has to have a happier ending. Was he could have left right then and there, and he was intending on leaving. He was saying goodbye to everybody, but he decided to stay there because he wanted to help give Billy a good time for the night.
Right.
And everybody decided they're gonna party, hardy.
Because why not? Two things I want to point out. The Kraft Legacy sounds like if Kraft put out an old-timey mac and cheese recipe with like retro packaging. I think that'd be pretty awesome. They should consider it. Also, wasn't the whole escape thing sort of precipitated by him learning that his sentence didn't necessarily depend on the court since he was in
that was a big part of it.
Yeah, that was the trade-off. He thought he was escaping a harsher sentence in the criminal system, but
but really they could keep him as long as they want.
Right. Yeah, he was counting down the days until and that was when he realized all the others were voluntary. It was like, if I remember correctly, there were the so-called chronics, which were half the people on the ward. And then you had, I believe it was the chief, Tabor, and McMurphy were the only ones who had been committed.
Yeah, and that's an important reveal, That's right there with, like, Fishhawk talking, because it sets up what most people would assume. No one's going to think, being in there, especially at that time, that, like, anyone would voluntarily be in this place.
And McMurphy is incredible. Like, he even looks at, I think it's even Cheswick, he looks at us like, surely not you. And Cheswick just nods, yes, I'm a voluntary, and it's like, now again, the voluntary with quotes, because, they're kind of there as long as Ratchet keeps them there, but it's,
the one
Yeah.
guy attacked his wife, for goodness sakes.
Right.
Like I
Well,
say,
the sad part with
commitment
a
was.
lot of them, the sad part with a lot of them is they probably on some level know, again, given the way that society was at the time,
Mm-hmm.
they probably know on some level that there's not a whole lot else waiting for them on the other side.
Right. Right. Which
Um,
actually is one thing that McMurphy takes issue with. The idea he tells Billy at some point, he's like, "You're just a kid. You got your whole life ahead of you." And he's like,
and
I think he makes it a little bit of a mission to try to help him out because he doesn't want to see him throw his entire life into the
Yeah,
asylum. You know.
and I think he
Yeah.
does that for all the characters that we get to know because he does
Mm-hmm.
expose. Again, I would never call R.P. McMurphy necessarily a good guy through and through, but he
Mm-hmm.
does do a lot of good things.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly because he is trying to expose these people to
well,
things that they wouldn't otherwise get to
Mm-hmm.
experience. Because part of treatment, I'm sure Brandon will agree with this. Part of treatment for whatever it is you've got going on is living a beyond just tackling the specific problem. It's also living a well-rounded full life to help supplement that, because if you can
Mm-hmm.
treat the problem to such a degree that that's all you think about and it comes at the expense of the other things that make life worth living that can
Mm-hmm.
supplement that treatment.
Mm-hmm.
and I don't really think. And keep in mind when this was filmed.
Mm-hmm.
So, statutory rape back in those days, and yes, statutory rape is rape, but it wasn't as dealt with like that then, though. Then it was tabooish, but a lot of people would not have looked at that as we would today, especially when it comes to a 15-year-old, when it comes to somebody like that.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
she
So
was
I
like
don't
17, he was
necessarily.
supposed to be like 19. That's not
Yeah.
really a big deal nowadays, but the 15-year-old shit, like,
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, people were marrying people that age
Yeah.
around that time,
Well,
so keep that in
basically,
I mean,
mind.
look how many rock stars got away with it back then.
Yeah, well,
Or
basically
directors.
the wider the age gap, that's always the more the increase in severity thereof.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
That's always kind of been that way, but you're right that like I'm thinking of like Jimmy Page. He did
the
it with a
dude
lot
from
of
Aerosmith.
David
Jimmy
Bowie.
Page did it with a lot of underage girls and stuff. And I think
again, that's
partially I think the laws were different in like the earlier parts of the 20th century, but also just societal
I
because
mean, I
again,
think it was always
people didn't live as
roundabout
long.
just as illegal, because the
Yeah.
dude from Aerosmith had to get her parents to like sign her over as he was
yeah.
her guardian or
That
whatever.
was Ted
and,
Nugent.
I mean,
Oh
you
no, that
you
was
got to
Ted
look at.
Nugent. Yeah,
Yeah, Ted Nugent. But you
sorry,
had, I mean, you
Steven
have like
Tyler.
Jerry Lewis from back in the day, and that was earlier on.
Right.
Dude looks
Or
like a lady. He
Elvis.
doesn't need a lady. You know what I mean?
So-
Elvis. I mean, Priscilla Presley was
Yeah,
was a
met her when
teenager.
she was 14.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I mean, and again, that's kind of a weird one because from all the evidence that's out there, yeah, like he had a connection with her early, but like he apparently like informed her parents all along the way, and as far as I
Still
know, didn't do
sus as
Still
anything
fuck.
not,
with
You
her.
yeah,
shouldn't be.
still.
You shouldn't be fooling around with like that, bro.
Yeah.
Still
You know.
sketch, you know?
Yeah, it wasn't. It was certainly not ideal, I would say, and
Like, well, you were talking about that Woody Allen. I mean, we were talking about Woody Allen a while back, and a lot of the creepy stuff that he's done is that's been proven is not necessarily the stuff that people are mad at him with, but the
Mhm.
stuff that he's actually done and has admitted to doing, and the people
Mhm.
there. And I mean, he's had affairs with women that were in their was 16 in their teens. I think Spielberg also had one. A lot of them when they were practicing back in those days. That's unfortunately. So I just want to say, I don't think that they would have necessarily viewed Nicholson as more of anything other than an anti-hero.
Yeah.
And the statutory rape claim would be something that most people would have probably
Yeah, it's
looked
not
at
really
him
focused
as.
on, like I said,
Yeah.
it's something I've noticed as I've gotten older. Where it's like, oh, dude likes a bit of the statue.
They
That's
almost kind
probably-
of mention it only really in passing, like it's not
Right.
really like
Yeah.
a big thing. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is why he's here.
Yeah.
You know, eh.
Right.
He's kind of
Yeah,
a,
they
he's a
they
free
mentioned
spirit.
that he's disorderly. He has some assault charges,
Well,
which is
I was
definitely
gonna say, like
that's
this
definitely
is
borne out in the
it's
film.
treated as an item on his rap sheet rather than
Right.
the entirety of who he is.
Right.
Which I mean,
Yeah.
if that were the entirety of who he was, and it would be a different kind of movie because
kind of says
Right.
something that they even threw it in to begin with, though, because it could have been any number of things.
True,
Again, that would
true.
have been something common back then that you might have done sometime. You
Mhm.
wouldn't have done as long a time.
yeah,
Right.
And again, I think if they were to make it these days, the statutory rape charge wouldn't even be in there. It
no,
would,
Which
it
I
would
think
probably
would
just
be
be like,
horseshit. I mean, it's like let
Probably.
the character be the character. But yeah, you're right.
Right.
They'd
Well, if-
probably
if
rub
you
off
it'd be
the
like
edges on
drunken
that one.
fighting or something.
if you were
stupid
to
like
if
that.
you were to have it in there, you'd have to dive into it a lot more extensively and make it more of a not so much of a passing
That'd be
thing.
more of a
Well, especially given that we're in the Me Too era, it's like anything that's even remotely in
Un-
that territory, you have
unless-
to dive into it a lot more deeply.
Unless you're making a statement about the doctor's mentality and
that too.
whether he considers it to be anything important or not.
Yeah, because the
Um,
doctor breezed over it and seemed to
He
be,
did, yeah.
he seemed to be at least feigning agreement, if not outright agreeing with him.
Right.
I mean, I think that was mostly, I assume, to just kind of get the conversational ball, rolling past that.
Right.
But like, still, it's like I was like, this guy is.
Right.
We wouldn't.
Well-
Most people probably wouldn't write a character that way these days.
Speaking of getting the conversational ball rolling, we so at the end of the night, the place is a wreck. It is a wreck, and everyone's kind of passed out every which way and the other. And for some reason, McMurphy is still in the place, passed out on the floor by the window. And you get, the inevitable Ratchet and her entourage show up, and they're like, what's going on here?
Oh man, you guys
And of course,
myself wince at this thing.
what's that?
I felt myself wince at that. It comes on in and says, "Well, this is not simply not how I left things."
Right. So she basically rounds up all the patients. They find Turkle in the office, and he's done for. They find Rose, and she boots her out of the building. One of the orderlies comes around and says, "Well, everyone's accounted for but Billy." And then she's like, "Well, find him." And so they start locking on all the doors until they knock on the right or the wrong door, depending on how you look at it. And they find Billy and Crystal in there, and he comes out to a fair bit of applause from his fellow. Yes, and of course, Ratchet just is not pleased with. I think she kicks Crystal out like immediately.
Just
And then
kills
she-
the Animal House vibes all over
Just-
the place.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
definitely a party kill.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
but here's the fun part, because Billy actually stands up to her. He actually speaks to her at full height with no stutter, just absolutely stands up to her. And then she goes and says, "Well, what would your mother think?" or something along those lines. And it's like,
one of the
Yes.
biggest HIPAA violations ever these days.
yeah.
If you ever
yeah.
wonder why laws like that exist
Yeah.
today, it's because of stupid stuff like this. Nurses would get to know the family members of these people, and they would just let them know stuff that they shouldn't know. Of course, his
Yeah.
mother probably checked him in the first place, but he's clearly
Right.
an adult.
Well,
And-
it's one of those things where
Yeah.
the a couple couple things that you find psychologically with women, especially at that time, that are in those kind of authority figure roles. They're probably heavily sexually repressed, and I mean, Nurse Ratched is so repressed, not even just in that realm, but in just every realm, to the point where you're like, is this even a human being anymore? So there's that, plus, the mention of mother, inevitably is gonna send the scared little boy, going
Right.
back into his shell, a la Norman Bates.
Take him
But
back to the Bates Hotel. Yeah.
well, that
Yeah.
not only that, but I imagine his mom's probably heavily sexually repressed too.
I imagine his
Correct.
dad would have been fucking hyped though to get that
Oh, I'm
news.
sure.
Like, boy had a stutter. I thought he'd never get there.
I kind of took it as
Right.
actually trying to reassert authority, and then start handing out punishments. Remember, she is the one that
Yeah.
she has an iron glove that's fitted over with a velvet glove. So she sees the problem. She says that this is not acceptable. She said, "I need to be in charge now." She did, and now I need to start punishing. So she's puts out the mother, the threat, which really is really effective because she cows him completely.
Yeah, and it's effective in all the wrong ways. I mean, she's supposed to be there to help and treat them, and it's like,
there's foreshadowing.
Yeah,
his suicide
the
attempt.
humor turns into very dark place. This is where everything starts turning really dark real quick.
Right.
Well,
Very interesting.
The planting and payoff in this script is really strong because you have the initial attempt at trying to lift the sink up to smash the window. That gets paid off. They set up the suicidal ideation. That gets paid off.
Another bet that McMurphy loses spectacularly with the
which by the way, which is his other attempt. He had an attempt to leave, but the suicide attempt, which I'm sorry though, she probably didn't intend to have him commit suicide.
No,
there was a part of her probably that felt like she was. Again, that's that arrogance that comes with that, being in control. And nowadays, you don't see it as much with nurses. You see it with the doctors. A ton of arrogance with psychiatrists in the field. But
she clearly had a good degree of respect within this obviously very male-centric medical world. But like, she's there with the other doctors and is able to more or less talk on their level. So I mean, as not likable as she is, I mean, that does say a lot about her relative to her time.
It definitely speaks from the place of authority.
Yeah,
and I do think that she was a little bit shaken by Billy's death. She definitely, I don't think she didn't plan that at all.
She didn't plan it, but she was definitely.
Nobody would have not affected by that. She definitely looked at it, but she didn't want to go ahead and start panicking because she was in control.
She wanted to project control even to the end, and she's like, okay, everyone, just go about your day, like that's going to happen. But
it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and and of course McMurphy goes to strangle her to death.
Yes.
Oh yeah, he flies off.
Which I understand. I would have probably, if I was in his position, I probably would have been right there because she really did kill him.
Yeah.
Whether she intended to or not, she may have even thought, well, he's just going to cut himself or something like that. But then it'll be there, and he'll punish himself. Because again, he goes away, and they don't bother to observe him. They don't send anybody to go after him.
Well, no, the other nurse was with him, and that's one point I want to make real quick. We haven't even talked about the other nurse, because basically she was just Ratchet's shadow for most of the film.
Yeah.
But she takes Billy into that room, and then a couple minutes later you hear her screaming, and it's like, if she had been watching him, there probably would have been raised voices or scuffling or something that wouldn't have been a scream like that.
She wasn't watching him.
Yeah.
What are you even doing in the 60s?
She failed
cell phones
spectacularly.
didn't exist. She didn't have a Game Boy in there. What the fuck is she doing? What else
so,
are you going to do but your job back in those days?
Yeah. But the
Splendid
point
and
is, I think
orderly.
she failed spectacularly in her job as
Bet you
well.
did.
But they, but they're still back at it because the next scene we got, they're back in the nurse's station. Ratchet has that nice little collar. And then, everyone's talking about, well, McMurphy, where is he? I hear he got away. No, he's on the floor up
Yeah.
top with all the mental cases or whatever. And then he does come shuffling back in late at night. They sneak him in at night, basically. And Chief is like, "Oh, hey, great, you fooled him. You came back." And then when he realizes, wait, no, he's
Yeah,
checked
he's
out.
actually been lobotomized. Which,
John,
Yeah.
well, I wanted to go back super fast to
Okay.
the actual strangulation there.
Yeah.
Now, if this were like a typical, more modern studio movie where there's a clear hero that we're supposed to like and a clear villain that we're supposed to hate, and this is going to be like the big triumphant audience pleasing moment where he finally gets back at her, then it would be filmed in that specific way. I like the fact that the way that this is filmed, you would be tempted to fall into those kinds of oh, he finally got back at her, that kind of reaction, but it's treated in a very ugly, nasty way, and I mean that as a compliment, because
Yes.
the act of strangling someone out of malice,
Is
um,
intentional.
yeah, and it's shown to be as ugly as it is, even though it's with someone that you don't necessarily like. But it's
Well,
like, did
right.
that
Yeah.
person deserve that? I don't know.
Probably not.
no,
I mean, fired, admonished, maybe do a little bit of time. Yeah.
I think
Manually
in that
strangled.
moment,
I don't know.
I think in that moment, though, at least for me personally, I think in that moment, the way it's structured, I'm like, go for it. I think a
Well,
lot of people felt that way.
but the way it's like how you feel about it's one thing, but
Right.
just like the way it's filmed,
Right.
like they don't do any of the obvious manipulation tactics. They're just showing you this is what's happening, and
Right.
you feel about it however you're
Mm.
gonna feel. And I love movies
Right.
that do that. They don't hold your hand too much. They just show you the facts and they let you decide
Right.
for yourself.
well,
So basically,
this is the fact that the chief is actually having a period of inner reflection, and he sees that Jake is gone. No, Jack is gone. He's gone. He's no longer with us, right? So he doesn't want to leave him there. He wants to leave now. So he decided to release the spirit, because this guy is a spiritual guy. That's what I'm
he
thinking.
says, "I'm taking you with me," and
He's a spiritual person. So he's going to release him in the least painful way possible.
Yeah.
In the quietest way
Yeah.
possible, so he can escape as well. So this was a double opportunity.
Well, and
Easily, in my mind, one of the most powerful moments in a movie ever.
Yeah.
It's way up there for sure. And then that's where they fulfill the title of one having flown over the cuckoo's nest, which obviously comes from a nursery rhyme, but it works out here because the idea is that the chief, and I guess you could say this, imbued by the spirit of R.P. McMurphy, he does it. He flies over the cuckoo's nest. He escapes.
Indeed. And then later went on to be in a movie called Fish Hawk. Caca.
Indeed. So that pretty much covers the plot. And since we are after 2 hours,
we went through it scene by scene.
Yeah.
Well,
every scene.
Well, quite a lot of them. Yeah. Does anyone have? We've talked a lot on the different bits and pieces, but does anyone have any specific stuff they want to bring up about the production?
Yeah,
I think
that they filmed this with about $2 million worth of money, and they made a hell of a lot of cash in return.
Yeah,
they
this
did
was a
that.
Pretty huge ROI for this movie.
I think
this was. I think it was mentioned before that no one wanted to touch this for over a decade. Kirk Douglas bought the book rights before the book was even published.
And he translated it.
Right. Well, he did that, and he actually got Forman's interest early on, but apparently he shipped the book into Czechoslovakia, and it never got to Forman, and they both thought the other one was rude, and for several years until it was cleared up. But anyway, so eventually Michael Douglas, Kirk's son, took over, and this was, I think, his first producer credit, which is kind of interesting. But they finally got it made, and on a relatively low budget, made a lot of money for the budget. I mean, this was a big grossing film.
The other producer, Saul Zantz, went on to work with him again for Amadeus.
Right.
Also won Best Picture for that one, and then won Best Picture a third time for The English Patient.
We'll do a lot more. We got a lot to talk about with Amadeus, I'm sure. And then we had an interesting thing where like 3 different camera people with this one. And then the music by Jack Nietzsche. What do y'all think on the music?
It's really great because it's really odd.
It is. It is
an
odd.
Excellent score.
They used a saw, which is kind of fun.
Yes, that makes it memorable, but also haunting in its way.
Right.
Yeah, it's not one I'd necessarily throw on the wax and spin the record. You know what I mean? But it works for the movie.
Right. So at any rate, why don't we go ahead, unless anyone has anything else big on the movie or the production or whatever, go ahead and do our favorites.
I think I'll just start with that. So I like kind of the finale, where Chief comes in and sees Jack Nicholson's been lobotomized, and he's like, I'm not leaving here without you. Don't worry about it. And then he just smothers him with the pillow, and it's like,
yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's hard for that not to be my favorite as well.
Okay. Well, that covers you guys. How about you, Roger?
I kind of feel the same way, because this whole story was being aimed at this moment. It was a travel of some people's lives, and how things changed in a moment. And I said, this is a fitting end, because the chief allows Jack to escape his prison. So there was an emotional moment for me as well.
Well, and the whole actually throwing the shit through the window is such like an emotional release. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's something about a lobotomy too. Like it's almost worse than like actually just killing the person.
Yeah.
You might as well just shoot them right in the face.
Right.
There was no excuse for that kind of procedure.
Yeah,
I would rather be killed outright than lobotomy.
Yeah, I'd rather die than be prison in your own body forever.
Yeah, that's about the closest we have to real life zombies.
Real life hell. Yeah, that's real hell.
Depending on the severity of the lobotomy.
All right, Brandon. How
Brandon's
about you?
over here like, we can just go shallow with it, have a good time.
Unless you've actually watched tapes of pre-orbital lobotomies, it's one that will make you queasy, even if you are into stuff like even you, Dave, if you witnessed a pre-orbital lobotomy in real life, probably would have some difficulty with it.
Yeah. I mean, real gore and shit like that's different than fake gore, at least for me. I enjoy like some splatter, but I absolutely do not like real death.
Yeah, nothing real.
I had my Rotten.com phase in like high school, but
that's why I don't like true crime.
Entertaining tidbit. It used to be used at its height on almost everybody, including unruly children.
Oh, good times.
Wow.
So your child acting up, just give them a lobotomy.
For kids.
Just tap a little ice pick back there.
They're coming to take me away. Hee hee ha ha. To the funny part.
You wanna go to the candy store, Timmy?
That was a plot point in BoJack Horseman, like when they were going into his mom's backstory. Like it was like ultra dark too. Like
that show is so amazing.
Like his grandma was like severely depressed after like her son died in like World War II, and they gave her like a really intense lobotomy and just completely killed her soul. And it traumatized BoJack's mom, and that's why she was so abusive to him.
I always
Well,
like
that
the
would
idea of
trump
like a
it.
weird old character in something, and then someone asks like why they're so fucking weird, and you're like, I don't know. They gave
Right.
Grandma several lobotomies back in the day, but none of them
Right.
took.
I mean, are there extra levels of
Right,
different
so-
kinds of economies?
So anyone,
God.
Well,
It
and
wasn't
my
Anyway.
funny. It
favorite
wasn't funny at
scene,
all. It was
yeah.
fucking scary.
So
and my
onward.
favorite scene was the boat scene. I don't.
Okay.
There is something freeing about it. It
It
did.
is a nice moment.
It was a moment that gave Jack Nicholson's character more definition. Again, he's the free spirit, and
Hmm.
back then I think he would have been more considered the hero or anti-hero than he would be today.
Right.
But I did think the boat scene illustrated those points amazingly well.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's easily my second highlight because it's a good middle bit too. A little chunk to sink your teeth into some feel good stuff for a while.
All right. How about you, Dave?
My favorite scene was, I would have to say, I'm gonna go with the whole baseball thing, because I kind of like
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact that even though Nurse Ratched wouldn't let them watch the World Series, he gave them a little fantasy that they were actually really there at the World
Right.
Series, and it was kind of like a fuck you to Nurse Ratched.
Yeah.
Well,
And the scene we
she
glossed
kinda-
over.
That's
She kind of, yeah, we skipped that, but she kind of deserved one at that because, again, she decided to put it to a vote. And he got all 9 of them to vote. She's like, I only count 9. And he's like, well, what do you mean? There's 9 of us. And she's like, no, there's 18 people on this floor, Mr. Murphy.
yeah,
And he finally gets the chief, I think it is, to
to
vote.
put his hand up.
But she's like, well, we've already called the meeting. It's over. So that was like her just rules lawyering just for her own benefit, really, I
Yeah.
think, there. And that was,
It
Also of note, Forrest did mention the World Series scene at the very beginning. I had a
Oh,
feeling he was
okay.
going to.
Oh,
Both of us
okay,
being
yeah,
sports
he did.
fans, So
Well, that
Well,
was
speaking of Forrest, what was your favorite scene?
yeah.
I would probably have to see the boat scene.
Hmm?
There you go.
Okay.
well, I would say the World
Alright.
Series bit, because to me that's kind of the movie in a nutshell. It's about a conflict, a battle of wills. It's rigid rule following kind of authoritarianism, but it's also about freeing your mind and
Mhm.
about not letting the system get you down, basically.
Mhm.
I would have fallen on the nurse's side with the World Series, not because I don't like baseball, but because I understand where she comes from. There's a reason why most of them didn't vote for it on the first go.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but I like the immediate aftermath that again
Oh,
it's
yeah.
all about, they can chain up your body, but your mind, if
Right.
you allow your mind to be free, then that's the ultimate freedom.
I'm going to say that I agree that that was a great scene, and the boat scene generally, the ending generally. But again, I love the reveal that the chief actually is more than he seems. That was a great little moment.
Mhm.
And again, my favorite moment is the scene where he's introducing all of them to the harbor master. And again, it's not just because they were picking on Harding, but it's because every one of them, when they're introduced as a doctor, for a moment, they get to be a doctor. And for a moment, most of them stand tall and are just like, this is great, and it's a great moment for a lot of them, I think. And like I said, it's kind of sad that one of them didn't get to share in on that, but so it's like simultaneously a really funny scene, but also kind of that nice little boost to their self-esteem. And then the ensuing boat scene it does have some good moments too. But yeah. All right. So is that pretty much do, or has anyone got any parting thoughts?
I'd say if you're going to go into this movie, try to wipe from your mind that it's talked about as being like this fucking masterpiece all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not going to hit you right the first time. Maybe you need to watch it like when you're home with the flu or something like that, or you're in the mood for some slow burn shit.
18 on the IMDb list of top films.
Yeah,
it's like
poppycock. Just forget about that. Go into it and just watch it as a movie. Maybe a couple of times. See when it hits you. And like these guys have all pointed out, you know, you'll get a little bit more from it each time that you check her out.
Personally, I do enjoy the film immensely. Is it the best film of 75? Maybe.
I mean, you have Jaws. I mean, you're not.
You have Jaws.
No.
You have Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Jaws slaughters this.
It does. I'd much rather watch Jaws like any day of the week. But this
Jaws is definitely more pure entertainment. I will give it that.
It's all in the preference. That's the idea.
And your mood, and also just like
there are times where I'm in a Jaws mood. Yes.
I would say though, just entertainment value. You sit your average person down at random and just put Jaws in front of them, or this. You know, they're more inclined to be entertained by Jaws. This might give them something.
This one has plenty of entertainment, but Jaws and Monty Python and the Holy Grail, they dance circles around this for pure entertainment. But
greatest comedy of all time, in my opinion.
I think it is one of the greatest. But anyway, we need to cover that one of these days too. Does anyone? I guess we'll start with outros. Why don't we start with you, Dustin? We'll just
Yeah, and then I think I'll
go for it.
So I'm a horror collector living here in Milwaukee. I find stuff. I used to find stuff pretty much everywhere I went. But it's been kind of a rough collecting year since I've been stuck inside for so long. But we're kind of working on changing that up. So in the next month or two, I'm hoping to have some more videos on my YouTube channel, The Crypt of Horrors. Because I have been picking up movies here and there. I also recently put in some orders for some figures I've been wanting for a while. So I'm going to be showing those off when they get here. So we've got kind of a wide variety of things on the way. We've got the Trick or Treat Studios Michael Myers figure coming. We've got some vinyl. We've got some props. We've got a lot of stuff that we can show off. So stay tuned for that. You can also find my Instagram, also The Crypt of Horrors. I've been a little bit better on posting there, just because I haven't been in the best condition to actually do videos, so it's just easier to take some photos. And you can also find me on Twitter at DurCryptaxis, which is pretty much where I spend all my time these days. So you can hear me complain about my life and show off all the stuff I find.
All right.
I'll go next because I also need to go because I got a big day at work tomorrow. So,
all right.
Dan Kyle, independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been on this channel and been on a channel called Indie Horror Film Creative, where I've done a show called Blu-ray Views, but I haven't done it in quite some time. Partially that's because I've been busy lately with, my job, but also I've been busy with rebranding everything and working on a video series that I'm going to be doing all throughout October. So, yeah, it's taken up a lot of time, but it'll be worth it in the end. But I'll be rebranding all my social media and everything with the new logo that I just finished today. Yeah, so I got quite a lot of work to do, but it'll be worth it.
I believe Dane also appears in Movie Hoarders, which is a doc that you guys have been talking about lately, and I'm sure we'll touch on in some capacity on the channel in the near future. So
yeah, Movie Hoarders is the documentary. It's thank you for reminding me of that. It's available on Amazon, on DVD, and on your various VOD platforms and things like that.
Good deal.
So yeah, I appear in that documentary, and apparently it's actually been selling pretty well, which is good.
Cool.
What's the title again?
Movie Hoarders.
Movie Hoarders. Oh yes, that looks interesting.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Well, I'm gonna say goodnight to everyone.
All
'cause
right. Thanks for
Good night,
joining
buddy.
us tonight,
I love you.
Dane, Dustin, both of you. Yeah.
Night.
All right. And Mo, why don't you go?
Well, my name's Mosley. I do a fair amount of videos when I feel so inclined. Haven't done any in the last couple of weeks, but I did recently review a movie that actually featured Louise Fletcher called Shadow Zone from Full Moon Entertainment. So definitely go over, check out my review for that. I've been building a lot of tabletop stuff and rearranging for things like that. So, there's going to definitely, like, once we hit a good milestone point in the Full Moon series, we're going to be launching some tabletop gaming stuff over there. So look forward to that as well. And, check out SeptumSin's recent broadcast of Spandex Heroes. Unfortunately, I missed out on that. So no Dirk Strokeman featured in that bitch, but I'm sure plenty of good stuff
Yeah, it was
nonetheless.
too bad.
Well, he was busy filming an adult film, so.
Hey,
Oh.
I mean, so you got to pay the bills somehow.
Well, I
Do I
guess
know?
that's as good a reason then.
My character, Dustin, for context, is Dirk Strokeman. He's an ex-porn star turned superhero. That's, special powers, the money shot. And we used great effect the last time that I was in a game.
I wasn't really paying attention, so it was like I only overheard part of that, and so I was like, "What?"
Hey, well, you know what? I had the privilege of explaining it anyways. So there you guys go. Tune into Spandex Heroes for more of that stuff.
I didn't realize Louise Fletcher was in Cruel Intentions. Oh, that's something. And her most recent one was Grizzly 2: The Revenge.
Oh man, what a mix of a movie that was! Holy crap! That's one of my pickups that I'm gonna show. That I need to
see it.
That I need to show off in my video.
Oh,
I picked that up in like March because there was a bit of a scare about Amazon not carrying made-on-demand titles anymore. And so I was like, oh no, I better get Grizzly before they stop making it. And so I bought it, and it is bad.
Hell yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Interestingly enough, it has.
The Jaws parallel with this, Will Sampson was actually an orca several years later.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm gonna have to see that movie.
Goddamn classic.
It's actually what's really funny about Grizzly 2 is it bills Laura Dern, Charlie Sheen, and some other guy who's important, like on the cover.
George Clooney.
Yeah, that guy. And they are in exactly one scene. Like, they're basically the kids who show up like to be fodder. Like they're in the movie for maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
They show up to be slaughtered.
They show up and die.
That should make it your favorite movie, Dave. I know you and Clooney are like buds.
I actually didn't mind Grizzly 2. It's just it was kind of a mess towards the end.
The effects were so terrible. Like, it was kind of breathtaking.
Since we're talking about shit like that. Go ahead.
Dave especially loved that George Clooney death scene.
There are specific roles that I think George Clooney was made for, and I think ER was it. So,
dude, my mom, like him and what's his ass, Sean Connery, were like 2 dudes. My mom would always be like, "He can eat crackers in my bed any day."
All right, Roger, why don't you give your outro?
Well, my name is Roger. I mostly collect anime and manga. I just started with this group, kind of looking into movies a bit more, and I also run Animation Collection Company. It's a Facebook group that specializes in anime, figure, and manga collecting. And my main goal in life now is to get the largest anime collection in the state of Florida.
You gotta be
very good.
Well, you don't have me for competition.
Neither me.
How about you, Forrest?
I'll sleep in that grid. It's gonna happen, dude.
I'm Forrest. I'm Forrest Bennett. I'm independent film producer based in Long Island, New York. Actually, have one movie titled Camp Murder, having our world premiere here on Long Island tomorrow evening. Red carpet, big screen, everything, and it's coming out on DVD next Tuesday. And also, I just recently restarted my YouTube channel, Forrest B. Bennett.
Mhm.
Also, besides here on Inside Movies Galore, you can also catch me on a couple of other movie web shows. Script Club.
Forrest, you stepping out on us?
No,
It's
no,
okay,
these
buddy. No, go ahead.
I'm on a couple of other movie related web shows. Inside Under the Radar, and Script Club on a channel called Evil Greg.
Nice. Didn't
All
you
right.
also do you just did a shoot recently for something? Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm still working on that. Yeah, it's a movie called Victim No More, written and directed by Bobby Heckman. I'm still working on that.
Good deal. All right.
Oh yeah.
So,
Brandon rules.
Brandon, how about you?
Well, SeptumSin is SeptumSin versus the world. We love physical media. That's all. That's all we do. Now we do have a couple of things. Like we had a fairly recent discussion of Unico last week, which the 2 Unico movies, and we look forward to that. And of course, the Spandex Heroes game that Mo pointed out. But of course, our main project and focus, we've got 2. Right now. One is we are nearing our 200th pickup episode. We hope to have appearances by a lot of the people here. Of course, we're going to make it a centric episode for collectors. We're going to talk about that whole physical media collecting and some awesome pickups. It's all going to be not necessarily about the new pickups this time, but about the most awesome ones, and talking about that. It's going to be a fun time. But we're also gearing up for the Versus Awards. We've come to that title because that way whoever hosts it, for instance, we're hosting it this time on our channel, and so it's going to be called SeptumSin versus the Versus Awards. But it could be Forrest Bennett versus awards. It could be any of these people as time goes on. And
versus the awards.
Yes. So, it's going to be fun. We've done 2 breakdowns. I had to resubmit because of a bunch of copyright claims. So we have to do it now in more of a podcast type format. But we're just going to break down each of the films as we go. We've got 2 out of 4 of those done, and we have ballots, and voting starts at the end of not next week, but the week after next. And we also have a great month for the Asylum coming up for Inside Movies Galore. With we're going back to our old schedule for a very brief time, whereas so on Delusions of Grandeur, we're going to be covering Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, so that we can then, for Inside Movies Galore, cover Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, and Forrest is going to be generous enough to walk us through those films together.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
Me too, buddy.
Oh, real quick, just because I know people are leaving, we will also be working, starting now, to try and come up with topics for next month, so we're not in such a mad screen.
All right. And I am Kotobukijake. I am the co-host on SeptumSin versus the World. And well, he covered most of the basics there, but we are having a lot of fun with these movie awards, and we've got to see some stuff we wouldn't have seen otherwise, and mostly for better, some for worse, but mostly for better. And it's been pretty interesting overall. I hope the rest of y'all are taking this opportunity to check out some weird random movies as well. It could be fun. Look forward to seeing how those votes shake out when we do the final show. And basically, I'm just also a collector, fan, what have you. have been somewhat limited in my viewing time of late, partly because of family issues, partly because I'm busy trying to build a nursery, and that takes up a lot of time. And but always fun to
Sorry,
come
dude.
hang out
Somebody's
with you
got to
guys.
raise me. Okay, I'm just a man baby in need of a father, Jay. And you've taken
Not
up
that kind of nursery, but Anyway, pass it back to you, Dave.
Alrighty, and my name is David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming along with us on this fantastic film journey. I mean, we have gone from Salo to insane asylums. So that being said, join us next week as we continue August in the asylum. With what was it again? What was next week's film?
Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going to be giving you some nightmares that'll last you for centuries.
And some Drunken.
And I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I do my own video pickups and video reviews. Although I have not done many as of lately, I am gearing up to come back with an attack worthy of something. So, in any case, thank you for listening. Have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you are. And I wouldn't be convicted of any or insane asylum worthy tendencies to get you into any asylums nearby.
Okay.
Back for the Attacks, actually a Drunken album, dude. So that's kind of cool.
But will you find asylum in the asylum?
I don't know, but priests find asylum in Wisconsin, so that's got to be something.
Oh. Wow.
As long as it's not the asylum.
Right.
What about Soul Asylum by the band?
Or Philosophaster. There we go.
Oh, that's a classic. Yeah.
In any case.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
And enjoy.
All right.